Welcome to the May 2023 meeting for the City of Troy Zoning Board of Appeals. I want to welcome all of our applicants, our guests, visitors, our fellow board members. We have a full board tonight and a full agenda. So let's get started. We'll start with the roll call. Mr. Evans.
Mr. Fox.
Here.
Mr. Green.
Here.
Mr. McCauley.
Here.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Here.
Mr. Desmond.
Here.
Mr. Kenkry.
Here.
Mr. Bossenbrook.
Here. All right, we'll move along to our second item, which is the reading of the statement of procedure, which gives us the roadmap for how we decide our cases tonight. And gentleman to my left, Mr. Eisenbacher, will, when he's ready, read us the statement of procedure.
Hello. The Zoning Board of Appeals is a group of 7 of your neighbors appointed by the Troy City Council to decide on requests for variances and other matters that are brought before them. A variance is a relaxation of the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance. Applicants must indicate a hardship or practical difficulty with the land that would warrant the granting of the variance. Procedure. The board will hear the items in the order that they appear on the approved agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the applicant is present. Then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. If there is less than a full board, 7 members present at a meeting, an applicant may request a postponement so his or her request can be heard by a full board. If there is no request for a postponement, the applicant will be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the applicant makes their presentations and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open the public hearing. Any person wishing to speak on the request should raise their hand and, when recognized by the chairperson, come up to the podium. The speaker should identify themselves with name and address, indicate their relationship to the property in question, for example, next door neighbor, live behind the property, etc., and state whether they are in favor of or against the variance request and give reasons for their opinion. Comments must be directed through the chairperson. Comments should be kept as brief as possible and closely pertain to the matter under consideration. Only one person will be recognized by the chairperson to speak at one time. At the conclusion of public comments, the chairperson will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comment will be taken unless in response to a specific question by a member of the board. The board will then make a motion to approve, deny, or postpone the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes are needed. If a request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to Oakland County Circuit Court.
All right, thank you, Mr. Eisenbacher. We will move on now to the third item, which is approval of last month's meeting minutes from April 2023. Do we have any comments or a motion to approve?
Moved to approve.
Motion from Mr. Fox. Any second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Green. Any further discussion? I think we're ready to vote on the minutes.
Mr. Bossenbrook.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Kenkry.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Fox.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
All right, minutes have been approved from April of 2023. We will move along to our fourth item, which is approval of tonight's agenda, which a copy is printed on the doorway out there if you'd like to review that. We have 3 items tonight, 2 items for 2 different properties. One of the items tonight is a carryover from last month's meeting, the property at 944 Marengo. As it stands, we have sort of bifurcated the 944 Marengo appeal into sort of 2 questions based on the memorandum prepared by the city attorney's office. We do have in the record an email correspondence that was submitted by the applicant who met with city attorney's office in late April, and there was a request from the applicant to amend the hearing of the cases so that these 2 separate issues, one being if the issue is, the variance is properly before us, and the second issue, whether we ought to grant the variance, to put them back as one item. So that email has been printed. I think it's in front of all of you. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. I brought the motion last month to separate the two issues. I'm open to discussion from the board if there is a desire to make it one issue. I think the only thing that we need to be careful about is that we deal with the issues in the order that they should be dealt with, but I don't have I'm open to discussion about how we formulate the agenda tonight. So anyone wish to speak on that? Mr. Green?
I would like to note that at least unless we decide otherwise, at the moment, the question as to whether or not this is essentially an appeal or a reapplication is in question, just for something that you'd said. So whatever this ends up, what we determine it to be, it wouldn't at least inherently be an appeal. However, I do think that because that's in question, we should keep them separate. We'll still cover the items, I believe, assuming pending the resolution of B one way or the other, but I would keep them separate essentially for that reason.
Okay. Mr. Evans?
And they're still fine touching the microphones here.
Sorry.
I want to make sure that everybody enumerates fully.
The long and short of what I said is that while this is not at this time considered to be an appeal, I do believe it needs to be considered separately.
Okay. Any other member of the board want to opine? Okay. I think we will continue with the agenda as printed. We'll approve the agenda as printed, which means we'll move along to item 5, and we will hear the first of our variance requests, which is for 942 Brooklawn. And we'll begin with Mr. Evans. When you are ready, if you could present this appeal for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As printed in the agenda, this is for property at 942 Brooklawn. This is a variance request to allow a proposed home addition to be set back 30 feet 3 inches from the rear property line. The zoning ordinance requires the addition be set back 35 feet from the rear property line. Now, this is an aerial of the neighborhood. We've got Big Beaver to the north, Adams is to the west, and the property is circled here in the middle at 942 Brooklawn. I'll continue to zoom in. And everything you see in this area, all the property is zoned single-family residential with the exception of the school. It's used that way as well. And there's a close-up of the property. This is the applicant's site plan. We've got Brooklawn on the bottom, the street. And this red area is the new proposed porch. Now, this is an enclosed porch, and as indicated by the setback call out for the new porch, it's going to be less than 35 feet from the rear property line. So in order to proceed, the applicant is seeking relief from the board for that variance, and the applicant's provided some additional elevation drawings that are also part of the board packet. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you. Any member of the board wish to present a question to the city staff? No? All right. We will move then to the applicant or the representative. If they'd like to step forward to the podium, and if you could identify yourself. And we already have what you've submitted in writing, but please feel free to present when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Richard Rassel, 380 North Old Woodward in Birmingham. I'm with the law firm, it's Williams, Ratner, and Plunkett. I represent James and Sheila LaPrette, and Mrs. LaPrette, Sheila is here, Mr. LaPrette, James is here, and our designer, architect, Oliver Reek, with the Architect firm is here as well to answer any technical questions. We are proposing what we have advocated to be a very modest addition in the rear of the property at 942 Brooklawn. Mr. LaPrette has lived in the property for 30 plus years, and Mrs. LaPrette for a very extended period of time as well. And what is happening here for the LaPrettes is that as they age and approach retirement, they're looking to try to make the residence that they have and all the other improvements that they've enjoyed for all of the years, and they're very private, screened, heavily forested, heavily arbored, and fenced backyard, work for them slightly better as they age into retirement. What they're looking to do is a very modest 130-foot, three-season porch that extends off the master bedroom to allow them to have the three-seasonal effect of being able to relax and enjoy the backyard. And obviously the hope is to extend their stay in their home for hopefully decades as they continue to enjoy the property that they've taken great care of and lived amongst their great neighbors in the subdivision on Brook Lawn. The lot is very thin, and what it does is a practical effect because based on our research, the current zoning designation, R1E, and its restrictions of 35 feet in the rear yard arose post-subdivision. So in effect, what you've got is a very thin lot, though it's fairly deep. And what that does is if you're going to make any modest additions or improvements to your home and, you know, things that are going to slightly increase the tax base and improve the neighborhood, you really have to do it in the front yard or the rear yard. If you're going to do it into the front yard, you're going to be making a much more public improvement. Perhaps your neighbors won't appreciate that as much. You're going to be changing perhaps the character of the neighborhood. If you do it in the rear yard off the master bedroom, in this case a ranch home, you're doing it in a very private setting. As I said, the area is screened heavily and for decades has grown, you know, all the arborvitae and the trees and everything has grown up and it was very mature back there. And the fencing provides a great deal of privacy. The LaPrettes, of course, discussed all of this with all of their neighbors that would be affected, all of those that would receive notice of the meeting here tonight, but also those that might just have an opinion. They shared the plans, they shared their views, they shared why they were doing this 130-foot, three-season addition, and the neighbors have signed, in effect, what looks like a petition, but is really a letter of approval. So because of the thin lot, which is a unique characteristic that, you know, doesn't you know, mirror exactly what the intent was of the setback restrictions in the R1D district, because this is an improvement to the neighborhood, because we are doing it in such a modest fashion and such a well thought out way, we think, and because we're not negatively affecting the character of the neighborhood or the essential nature of the zoning ordinance, we think that we have a meritorious request. We think we've met a practical difficulty based on the nature of the property. I did submit a letter dated April 6th. I'm sure you've read all of that. So some of this is a bit repetitious, I understand, but I'm trying to just make sure you understand our position. Of course, and answer any questions. Paul Evans was great. He met with us and was able to identify what additional information the city needed in order to get us on the agenda. And we appreciate being here. And we'd ask that the practical difficulty variance of the rear yard as identified in our letter and by Mr. Evans of 5.5 feet into the rear yard 35-foot setback be granted. And as I indicated, the homeowners and their designer, architect, general contractor are here.
Thank you. Any member of the board wish to ask a question of applicant's counsel or Mr. Gengry?
In your background, you mentioned that it is a single floor home, so it's a ranch home.
That's correct.
Okay. What is the square footage of the home?
What's the square footage of the current living area?
Right.
The small home, it's 1,300 square feet approximately.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other members of the board? I do have a question.
Of course.
I don't know, Mr. Evans, could you put maybe the map back? Maybe, yeah, that's good. So I have a question about comparing, is it 942 to the parcels maybe to the west or to the south. They all look they're all sort of similarly shaped, I guess. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. But when we talk about like an exceptional characteristic that makes this different, substantially more difficult than the great majority of properties in the same zoning district, I guess what do you think differentiates 942 from these other properties to say, or if these other, homeowners decided they wanted to do a similar sort of, porch or addition, they would have the same type of argument that these owners do. I'm just thinking towards what we have to look to for the first item to really say, what is it about the property that makes this different than most other similarly situated properties? Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. The first question, the exceptional characteristics requirement of your ordinance, we probably went into the most detail in our letter about that issue because I felt, probably like you, Mr. Chair, it's the most important question. What's going on here is if you look across the zoning map for the city of Troy, you'll see that R1E is a very common designation. There are neighborhoods all over the city of Troy that have in turn, they have 35-foot setback requirements. And a 35-foot setback requirement on a wider lot, a 35-foot setback requirement in a newer neighborhood where the lots have been designed for the zoning district are often, and I'm not going to suggest to you that that's too much or too little, and I wouldn't suggest to you that some of our neighbors, to the extent that they were not imposing significantly into the rear yard, wouldn't have perhaps a similar argument. I have to take the LaPrettes as they are, though, and I have to look at the fact that they have a very, very deep backyard. There's significant separation from the property to the east and to the west as it relates to the backyard because of the fencing and the screening and all the arborvitae and the trees and the other plantings that have grown up. So if I look at that, I say, well, if they wanted to make an improvement, they could build up. But that would change the character of the neighborhood. You'd have a different sight line from the street. If they wanted to build out onto the front and bump the front of the house on, it would have the same effect. They have 5-foot setbacks on the side. They can't build it either side setback. It'd be absolutely impossible. You couldn't build an inch out there, much less anything significant. The only place that they can add modestly and improve their property for what they think is certainly the betterment of their family, but we think the betterment of the neighborhood is to go modestly into the rear. If we were asking for a 15-foot setback variance and looking to build something substantial back there, I think our argument would be greatly diminished. But because this neighborhood was platted in a very narrow fashion, probably to increase the density for the developer at that time, and then the R1E was later imposed as a district, which may have made sense, I do think the answer to your question, it may be, Mr. Chair, that there are other properties throughout the R1E district in this neighborhood that might have an argument, but I don't know exactly what it would be. And if you're looking at what the LaPrettes have proposed in degree, we're talking about 5.5 feet and 130 square feet. I think what we're asking for, I'm suggesting to you, obviously I'm advocating that this is reasonable under the circumstances. This is a great example of why practical difficulty variances exist under Michigan law and in the Troy ordinance. And that's why we went to our neighbors before the petition they signed is very recent. We wanted it to be contemporaneous for the hearing tonight, but we went to the neighbors before we even hired Mr. Reek to look at the property, and certainly long before I was engaged. And so the LaPrettes were not surprising anyone. They had approached them months and months and months ago. And they all concur that this helps keep the LaPrettes in. There's a difficulty there, I suppose, somewhat uniquely too, because the LaPrettes are getting on the older end of their professional careers, and this allows them to have more staying power in Troy and in their current home rather than have to think about relocating so we think it's modest and appropriate.
Can you touch on you said it's a thinner lot. Can you explain more, I guess, the timing? When was this home built versus when was the current, I guess, R1E designation that this makes it sort of different than, a newer build in a different part of Troy?
Yeah, we think the original footprint of the house is approximately how old? 1955. Yeah, 1955. My research showed that the R1E district came in the 1990s. I don't have those minutes in front of me, and I don't have the adoption of that resolution. That was the research that we looked at. The amendments happen over time across the zoning map, but, Detroit back in the 1950s was a remarkably different community. I remember driving, I grew up in this area, I remember driving around Troy, even near Somerset, and it was fields of corn, out in these areas. So you had a remarkably different circumstance under which the LaPrette's house was built. This is a fairly dense subdivision. I think when they put the R1E district here, it's appropriate for the neighborhood, but in this instance, I think there's an argument that the setback at 35 feet, while arguably appropriate in general, in this particular instance, there's a significant argument to vary it a bit.
All right, thank you. All right, any other members of the evening? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time. At this point, I will open up public hearing. If there's any member of the board that would like to, or sorry, the board, any member of the public that would like to speak at the podium, feel free to come forward. Otherwise, I think Mr. Eisenbacher, you want to mention the petition?
So on the table, we have items placed. This one particular item is the petition that was circulated by the petitioner. We have signatures from, perfect to have the map up there, signatures from 934 Brooklawn in support, which is immediately adjacent, 926 Brooklawn, which is 2 over, 950 Brooklawn, the other side of the house, and 941 Nampa, I believe, to the rear. It touches in the rear, right? Yeah, there. So 4 households approving in the immediate vicinity of the petitioner.
All right, thank you. Seeing no more public comment, I will close the public hearing. And, yeah, Mr. Eisenbacher.
This neighborhood has come before us quite a few times in the past just because all the houses are small, and as the petitioner stated, it was zoned and platted before the city was a city and had the zoning ordinance that's in place now. So I see the hardship. We've granted a hardship to several other homes in the neighborhood. And I don't have a problem because, as the petitioner stated, this is modest. The size and dimensions of the proposal that's put before us is not intrusive to any of the neighbors as they signed on their petition.
Mr.
Go ahead.
I just agree. I remember at least 2 others that have happened in this neighborhood, and I think we approved both of them for the same reason. It's abnormal for the characteristics of modern Troy versus when it was platted, so I would also support if a motion was put forward.
Mr. McCauley?
I agree. I look at even with the front yard, if you look at the more zoomed in, it's got that little wiggle to it. And I think because of that little wiggle in the front lot line, that's set that house back farther if you look at it compared to the houses to the, I believe, the east of it. And I'm guessing it's 5 feet at least. So from my standpoint, I agree with Mr. Eisenbacher, Mr. Desmond, that this is something that's doable.
Mr. Kinkery?
Yes, I agree with everybody. I think the lot is too narrow. It is not consistent with the lifestyle that people in Troy have today. It's just kind of like a relic of the past. And the setback variance of 5 feet out of 35 is like less than 15%. So I'm in support of granting the variance.
Thank you. Mr. Fox?
Yeah, for the sake of the applicants, I don't know if this is something that we'd want to get into right now while they're here waiting for us to make a decision. But I want to echo, not only do I agree with the board, if in this particular neighborhood, this issue's been coming up repeatedly, I do wonder at what point we maybe request city staff to look at the setback requirements and see if it's worth just amending the ordinances so that we don't have to keep having residents come back here, especially if there's consistently from the same neighborhood having the same issue and you know what I mean? Because every time a resident comes here, they end up having to pay the application fee. And if it's a problem that we're seeing kind of repeatedly and it's something that the city could potentially alleviate, again, I don't know if we want to get into this right now because the applicant's sitting here waiting for us to give them a decision on their property here, but I think it is something worth exploring in the future. So I just want to say that for the record.
Take that under advisement. Any other members of the board wish to either be recognized, or do we have a potential motion to present? Mr. Green.
This is actually, pardon, a question for either city staff or our liaison. What is the shallowest depth allowed for residential zoning, for single-family residential zoning districts in Troy?
I didn't hear the question.
What is the shallowest rear setback permitted?
E.
Yeah, I don't remember the depth off the top
For
of my head.
single-family residential, the least amount of rear setback is for the R1E district. It's right here on, it's 35 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fox.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Fox, seconded, was it Mr. Eisenbacher? Did you second that? Okay. Do we have any, do you want to go through the steps, through the criteria, so we have that on the record?
Yep, I would, if I could add to the seconding that
Please.
the exceptional characteristic for the property is the shallowness, the smallness in the zoning of this particular neighborhood before the city was established, or not the zoning, the platting of this neighborhood before the city was established. For item A. Item B, it's not related to, it is related to this premises and not to another location. C, it's not of a personal nature. The platting happened the way it was. D, is not created by a current or previous owner. E, and it will not be harmful or alter the essential character of the area in which the property is located, will not impair the adequate supply of light and air to adjacent property, or unreasonably increase the congestion in public streets or increase the danger of fire or endanger the public safety or unreasonably diminish or impair established property value within the surrounding area or in any other respect impair the public health, safety, comfort, morals, or welfare of the inhabitants of the city. So I believe all 5 criteria are met very clearly.
All right, thank you. Anyone else want to add anything else? Nope. Okay, Mr. Evans, we are ready for a vote on a motion to approve the variance.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Bossenbrook.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Kenkre.
Yes.
Mr. Fox.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Variance is granted.
Variance is granted, 7 votes. Thank you very much for your presentation tonight and for coming out.
We appreciate it very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. All right, we will move along now to item 5B, which is, as I mentioned when we talked about the approval of the agenda, we have in front of us regarding 944 Marengo. This is consideration as to whether item 5C is properly before the Zoning Board of Appeals tonight. We had a application for a variance request at this property in February of this year, and according to my notes, it was for a particular lot split for 72.61 feet each. That particular variance request was heard by the board, like I said, in February. It was denied, and we have before us another variance request for the same property, also with the same nature of request to split the lot, although with a different frontage or a different type of split. And so the question has been presented to us as a board based on the memorandum that the city attorney's office prepared dated April 12, 2023, which is part of the agenda packet from last month. Whether or not, the first question for us to consider is whether this variance request is properly before us, because under section 15.05, there is a requirement that the applicant wait a year to reapply unless certain conditions are satisfied. So that's the question before us in 5B. I trust members of the board have had a chance to review the city's memo, and I'll start in a similar fashion by asking the city staff if they have anything they wish to add about this before I'll give it over to the board to ask any questions at this point to the city staff.
I would just suggest you let the applicant make a presentation and have the public speak on the first item as a regular variance request.
Yes, that was my intention.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep, thank you, Mr. Motzi. My intention is we will let the applicant and/or his representative come forward and discuss that item. Yes, Mr. McCauley.
I got a question. Discuss the reason why we should hear it again, correct?
Yes, since that's the first item on the agenda.
Okay, all right.
We'll let the applicant present
If I
their
could,
position.
I could ask a clarification.
Yes,
Sorry.
Mr. Fox.
So is the goal here, are we going to have like a separate vote on the decision of whether or not to discuss the second? So I guess what I am wondering is for this first item, is it expected that the public would limit their comments to not be about the actual application, but be about whether or not it is a different enough variance? Do you get what I'm saying? I'm worried that we'll end up hearing maybe repeated comments multiple times that are about the application when the first item is whether or not we should even be discussing the new variance. Does that make sense?
That's correct. That would be my intention,
Okay.
is that at this point, the discussion and the comments and the presentation that we would like to hear are regarding whether this particular variance request is separate, distinct, and can be heard by the board.
Okay.
And let's reserve comments, if we get there, to the substance of this variance request to that third item. Mr. Green.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, and I understand that we need to determine if it is a different request or whether the applicant is bringing new evidence not previously discovered or the conditions have changed. Can I ask that essentially be the first question is whether the applicant considers it different, and if not, then what evidence has changed, and then we can decide if it's different or if we can rehear it.
I think that would be appropriate.
Thank you.
I think it'd be appropriate for the applicant to either say it's a different variance request, or it's the same variance request, but there is new facts to consider, which is how I think we would read 15.05. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Unless anyone has any questions for city staff, we can go ahead and have the applicant or his representative step forward if they would like to speak on this first issue. And as always, if you could please identify yourself, sirs, and your relationship to the property, and proceed.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Good evening, board members. My name is Ali Apihidian. I'm the owner of the property located at 944 Marengo. And joining me this evening is my attorney, Mr. Darius Dinkowski, from the law firm Butzel Long. Thank you for the opportunity to present before you the facts of the variance request that were submitted for the April 18, 2023 ZBA meeting versus the variance request submitted for the February 21st, 2023 ZBA meeting. And in my presentation, I will answer that question. So I will answer it up front. What I'm suggesting and proposing before you right now by presenting this is that the variance request is different and it's a new variance request. And the information I will present will support that. My attorney and I had a chance to review Mr. Motzny's letter sent to all ZBA members on April 12, 2023. The prepared response will focus specifically on section 15.05 subsection A6 of the zoning ordinance that is mentioned in this letter. The inverse of this section is the following. An application for a variance which has been denied by the ZBA can be resubmitted in a period of less than 1 year from the date of denial if there is new evidence not previously discovered at the time of the variance when it was denied, or change conditions. The zoning ordinance requires that I only present one or the other, but I will present both, change conditions and new evidence. I will start with the change conditions. When an applicant comes before the ZBA with a variance request to split one lot into 2 lots, there exists only 2 options for a lot frontage dimensional variance. One option is that both lots resulting from the split require a variance. The second option is that only one of the lots needs a variance and the other lot meets the frontage requirement of the ordinance. In my case, it's option number 1. I applied for 2 variances for 2 lots. The premise of this letter from the city attorney's office incorrectly claims that there is a third option, and this third option would be a variance request for the total of the variances requested. Such an option exists nowhere in the zoning ordinance. I'll come back to this in a moment. First, I will present how the conditions of the new variance application submitted on March 13, 2023 are different than the application submitted back in January 13, 2023. Mr. Evans, can you please put up the first slide that shows option number 1? I actually have that. I have it in slide option as well as printed option for the board members. This drawing shows 4 basic geometric conditions of the first variance request that was denied at the ZBA meeting in February. The frontage of the proposed lots was equal. The requested variances for both lots were the same. The areas of the proposed lots were virtually the same, and the setback from the existing house to the proposed property line was about 20 feet. This is option number 1. Next slide, Mr. Evans, please. Option number 2. This drawing shows the new geometric conditions proposed in the variance application that was submitted on March 13, 2023. Next slide, Mr. Evans, please. Presented in this chart are the 4 changed conditions: the frontage width of each lot, the variance width requested for each lot, the total area of each lot, and the side setback from the existing house to the proposed property line. Each of these geometric changes qualifies as a change condition as described in section 15.05A6 of the zoning ordinance. Let me address the city attorney's office letter once again. The second paragraph has the following statement of that letter, quote, "The applicant is again seeking a lot split and has asked for the same width and frontage variance of 54.78 feet. This statement is technically incorrect and false. You will not find the number 54.78 feet anywhere in my first variance request application, nor my second application. And the reason you won't find it there is because I never requested a variance of 54.78 feet. This is what a variance request of 54.78 feet would look like." Mr. Evans, can you please put up option number 3, and you can look at that in your packet. This is not the variance request I requested. This is not what I applied for. I did not apply for one lot to be 100 feet in width and the other variance request to have 54.78 feet, nor did I apply for a total variance request. I applied for 2 separate requests for 2 separate lots. The application process first requires an applicant to submit the lot split request to the assessing department. If the assessing department denies the split request, the applicant has the option to pursue a variance through the ZBA. The application I submitted to the assessing department on March 10, 2023 was reviewed and denied by the Deputy City Assessor, Kimberly Harper. The denied application that you all have in front of you that was part of the agenda packet has a check mark in front of the words that say does not meet with requirements. And Ms. Harper added her own handwritten side note with a dash and the words both lots. Why is this significant? Because even she acknowledged that the variances I would need to request from the ZBA are 2 variances for 2 lots, not 1 variance for 1 lot the way Mr. Motsney describes it in his letter. Another solid argument that my variance request should be applied to 2 lots and not 1 lot is the official definition of the word lot as defined in section 2.02 of the zoning ordinance. I'm going to read the definition for the record. The term lot shall mean a parcel of land occupied or intended to be occupied by a main building or a group of such buildings and accessory buildings or utilized for the principal use and uses accessory thereto, together with such open spaces as are required under the provisions of this ordinance. A lot may or may not be specifically designated as such on public records. This means that the 2 lots presented before you can be viewed as 2 separate lots for the purpose of this variance request, even though they are not split yet with their own parcel ID and recorded in the public records. Therefore, Mr. Motzny's claim that I requested the same total lot width variance of 54.78 feet has no basis in the zoning ordinance. I read the meeting minutes of every single lot split application that has come before this board since 2000. That's for the past 23 years, and I watched most of the meetings. There's not one single case where either the applicant applied for a total lot frontage variance or a ZBA member or a city staff member required or reviewed such an impossibility. Every single case, without exception, is a variance request for the frontage of individual lots, not for the total of multiple lots. The 4 geometric conditions are different on the second application than they are on the first. That should be sufficient evidence to allow this variance application to be heard by this board. But just in case that's not sufficient evidence for someone on this board, I have even more new evidence that's going to be presented to justify this variance application's hearing. During the February 21, 2023 ZBA meeting, the theme that dominated the entire conversation was the false claim that my property is a swamp. Mr. Reedman, who lives at 926 Marengo, got up here and described my property as a swamp without presenting absolutely any evidence. What made matters worse was when members of this board took an unsubstantiated statement made by a neighbor and formed their overwhelming opposition to my variance request around it. The shocking moment came in when Mr. Forster made a motion to deny the variance based on false information and or unsubstantiated claims made by this neighbor, by the neighbors. Mr. Forster never once asked anyone to present proof of the claims they were making about 944 Marengo. He just took all the false information and not only accepted it as fact, but used it against me. What I'm going to present to you is new evidence that will prove that 944 Marengo is not a swamp. And this is information that is required by this section, new evidence. And this relates to information that was presented last time that was false, and I'm going to present new evidence to counter and rebut the false information. What I'm going to present to you is new evidence. First, let me start with my statement of fact. The property at 944 Marengo does not have any wetland on it and is not in a floodplain and is not a swamp. Mr. Evans, can you please put up the FEMA floodplain map, the next file that is titled FEMA floodplain. It's not in this file, but it's one of the other files that I emailed to you. Correct, this one, thank you. This map is the official FEMA floodplain map for the Marengo neighborhood. The red arrow points to the area of the 100-year floodplain in the backyards of the houses at 750 through 826 Marengo. 944 Marengo is not even close to that floodplain. There is zero floodplain on the property of 944 Marengo. Next slide, Mr. Evans, please. This is the official wetland map from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy for the larger area around Square Lake Road and Rochester Road. The blue diamond is where 944 Marengo is located. As you can tell, there is plenty of wetland that's officially wetland or categorized wetland in that area. But it's not on Marengo. Next image, Mr. Evans, please. This is a zoomed image of Marengo Drive showing specifically 944. As you can see, there is absolutely zero wetland of any kind on the 944 Marengo property. What about swamp? Michigan Department of Natural Resources, also known as the DNR, says this about what a swamp is. Swamps include a broad range of wetlands that have standing or slow-moving water and are dominated by trees or shrubs. Swamps provide habitat for mink, muskrats, beaver, otter, black bears, squirrels, hares, barred owls, snakes, turtles, frogs, toads, dragonflies, and many other insects. 944 Marengo is obviously not a swamp. And if you're still not convinced, the next piece of evidence I have are photos of the property from April 17, 2023 until May 14, 2023, just from 2 days ago. The photos show the property from the front, the rear, and the side. The side views show the house and the garage of 926 Marengo in the background. Mr. Evans, can you please start the PowerPoint file? It should advance by itself. These slides will go until the date of 5/12. These are images that I took personally from the front of the property. I took even more images. I just try to condense them and keep them as short as possible. The front, the back, and the side of the property, every single day for the past month. This is part of the new evidence. Does this look like a swamp to you? Do you see any muskrats, beavers, otters, or black bears on this property? This is a green lawn, just like tens of thousands of other green lawns in the city of Troy and on Marengo.
Excuse me, can I just have some quiet back there, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. At the ZBA meeting on February 21st, 2023, Mr. Riedman, the owner of the next door property at 926 Marengo, stood here before you and made the following statement, quote, "From basically late April to June, you can't get a riding mower in there because you get stuck." Mr. Evans, can you please play the video that I submitted to you in the file? That's my landscape guy mowing the lawn on May 6, 2023. Do you see a mower driving through a swamp anywhere? Do you see a riding mower getting stuck anywhere? No. The facts prove that what Mr. Riedman said was not true. The second piece of new evidence I will present here is regarding the content of a letter that was mailed to the planning department by the owner of the property at 943 Marengo. In this letter that was read into the record at the February 21st ZBA meeting, Mr. Carl Marduskeli, the neighbor, the owner, made the following statement, and I quote.
Sir, can I just, one
Yes.
thing? As you're naming people's names, including members of the board, I just want to caution you, we try to come here with a spirit of goodwill.
Yes.
And try to treat each other with candor and respect. I don't know that anyone here is acting falsely. So I just would ask you to be cautious in how you are characterizing some of the applicants or some of the neighbors, some of the board members who were part of that February hearing. You're entitled to present the facts as you want to present them. But some of the comments you've made about some of our board members who I think did their best efforts at the February meeting, I just want to make sure that we're all treating each other with respect, okay?
I agree. And what I'm presenting is just facts. I'm not characterizing anybody. I'm presenting the facts and the evidence of what happened at the last meeting and what was actually said verbatim, and I'm quoting. I'm not making anything up. This is all part of the minutes, so I'm not mischaracterizing anybody. I'm quoting.
Proceed.
Thank you. At the last board meeting, the owner of 943 Marengo said, quote, "I can't see any reason to rezone or split the lot at 944 Marengo. Others have tried to do this in previous years, and other owners have tried too." I don't know where Mr. Martis-Kelly got his information, but it's completely false. And that's not a mischaracterization, that's just fact. The facts reveal a completely different picture. I inquired at the city's planning department for copies of all applications submitted for a lot split for 944 Marengo since 1956 when this house was built until today. Do you know how many lot split applications exist from the previous owners at 944 Marengo? 0. The evidence is very different than Mr. Martis-Kelly's false statement. And yes, it's false, because that's false information that was entered into the record and was used as part of the motion to deny my variance. So I can make that claim. It's not mischaracterization. It's a false statement. If it would have been an opinion, that's very different. It was used to formula a motion to deny my variance back in February. That was wrong. It should have never happened, and the board should have considered only facts, not false information. What I just presented before you were the changed conditions and new evidence that meet the exemption required by Section 1506, subsection A6, to allow my second variance application to be submitted as a new request and heard by this board. For anyone on this board who has never deliberated on an ordinance interpretation case before, as we have right now, I would like to quote the professional advice of a reputable organization that some of you might be familiar with, the Michigan Municipal League. The MML is a statewide association representing more than 500 full-service cities, villages, and urban townships. The city of Troy has had a long relationship with the MML. Current Troy City Council member Rebecca Chamberlain-Kranga is a current Board of Trustees member of the MML. Mr. Paul Evans, Troy zoning specialist, is a current president of the Michigan Association of Code Enforcement Officers, which is an affiliate organization of the MML. And City Attorney Ms. Lori Bloom is a past president of the Michigan Municipal League Defense Fund. The MML has an official zoning board of appeals handbook that was written specifically for ZBA to help ZBA members understand the scope of their role and their responsibilities, and to provide them with the basis of understanding in order to capably perform their duties within the law. This ZBA handbook states the following, quote, "Generally, if equally convincing points are put forth by the zoning administrator and an individual affected by an interpretation, fairness dictates that the person most affected by the interpretation should prevail. In other words, where two interpretations are reasonably equal, the benefit of the doubt should be given to the property owner rather than the zoning administrator," end quote. I believe what I presented before you this evening is a sufficient amount of facts and evidence that align with the requirements of the zoning ordinance for permitting a new variance request hearing for the application I submitted on March 13, 2023. Thank you for your time and your patience, and I can answer any questions if you have any.
All right, thank you, sir. Questions from the board, anyone? Okay. Mr. King, you have a question.
Have you looked at what is the total amount of precipitation that Troy has seen this year in the month of April as compared to, say, in other years? Just to understand if the rain that we have had this year, is it comparable, is it more, is it less? Just to get an idea of the precipitation.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Kinkry, and that is very applicable here. What I did do, actually, is I have all the evidence compiled of the rainiest days of the year when I took these photos, rainiest days of this 30-day period, and I took screenshots of the weather report, when it rained, how much it rained, and consecutive days in a row when it rained. I just didn't want to add that to that slide to extend that slide, but I have that evidence to show you that during this amount of period, and I don't think we all have to go back too far, but we can all remember that we had some very extensive rain period in the past 30 days in Michigan. So if you want additional research to compare to previous years, I mean, that's obviously available out there for anybody to do that research, but I have the evidence of when these pictures were taken with the actual meteorology report that's on my phone. I just didn't want to put it part of this slide. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's going way above and beyond to provide meteorology reports here for the past 10 or 15 or 20 years for a zoning board application to compare inches of rain or precipitation on a property for the past 20 years. I think that's going way above and beyond, and it's unnecessary for a variance request, in my opinion.
I have just two quick questions. So your position is that we have both new evidence and we have changed conditions that would make this eligible to be before the board again. That's what your position is? Both of those have been?
That's my position, and that's a presentation that what I presented before you, although Section 1505 requires only one. And I presented both, new evidence and changed conditions, yes.
So I appreciate all the evidence about, for example, the flood zoning and the flood maps and things of that nature. Can you explain how that's new evidence that wasn't previously discovered in February?
The way that's new evidence is very simple. When a member of the public comes before this board and is allowed to speak, a member of the public is allowed to their own opinions, but they're not allowed to their own facts. Those are two different things. So when a member of the public came here before this board at the last meeting, they presented what they said. They characterized my property as a swamp. Now, when somebody says the word swamp, if they don't mean swamp, they shouldn't use the word swamp, because swamp has a specific meaning in the context of a property and the description of a property, and we don't get to use our own definition of swamp. So if somebody exaggerates and they just didn't really mean to say swamp, but they just said swamp, so to actually invoke some kind of response from this board to vote against the variance, that matters. And what matters even more is, yes, so if somebody presented my property as a swamp, I just presented before you multiple pieces of evidence that my property is not a swamp based on the technical and the environmental definition of subject matter experts that are part of state and local government. And that's why this is new evidence, because somebody came up here and said this property was characterized as such, and what mattered even more is that the motion that was made and the vote that was taken was based on that characterization of the property, and the whole conversation around this whole request from last time was about flood, and that's why it matters.
Okay. And we typically offer an applicant the opportunity to rebut public hearing comments. So could you have said that at the public hearing in February in rebuttal at the time against what you would have perceived to be a mischaracterization of members of the public?
I could have, but I wasn't given a chance.
Did we not give you a chance to rebuttal?
No, sir. I spoke, the members of the public spoke, public comment was closed, and it was over. And your board made a motion, and you voted. And I had, if you would have given me a chance, you can be sure I would have rebutted that. You can be 100% sure I would have rebutted that. I was not given a chance.
Okay, that wasn't my recollection. Mr. Green, go ahead.
I have a question, and I can be told that it is out of order, but as you have brought this application, are you bringing it as a resubmission for an existing one based on our denial, or are you bringing it as a new request? And I'm asking because it just determines on how we're discussing this for its applicability.
After submitting and providing all this evidence, it should be very evident that I'm submitting a brand-new application. I'm not submitting a new request, a resubmittal of the old one. This is a brand-new application, a new request, new geometric conditions,
Okay.
completely different. It's not, just because it's a variance request doesn't mean it's the same variance request.
Correct. That's what I'm asking. You're
Yes.
saying it is a different one.
It's a different one. It's
Which means that the
completely
new
different.
evidence is not, while it can be considered, assuming we consider it, the new evidence isn't applicable to a new request until we hear it.
The new evidence is applicable to item 5B. That's what we're discussing here, and that's what I presented to you. It's not, this evidence is not for 5C.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Green. All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your presentation. At this point, we will open up the public hearing to offer any opportunity for public comment. Yes, hold on, Mr. Green.
Sorry. You might want to re-clarify that this is specifically as to whether or not we should.
I'm just about to do that.
I'm so sorry.
Okay. So let me clarify. We would invite public comment to the specific question of whether this is a new variance request or how this applies to 1505. We would not want to have public comment at this point as to the substance of the variance request. That would be a separate item should we get to it at 5C. Just want to clarify, so we're keeping along sort of a clear line as we're moving along. Okay, not seeing any public comment on this.
Do they want
Sir, did you want to come forward? Or ma'am?
Thanks.
And if you could identify yourself, sir, and your relationship to this appeal, your address, that would be much appreciated, and we're glad to have you tonight.
My name is Carl Marticelli. I live at 943 Marengo. Primarily at two things. When I said that I talked to people that I talked to people that potentially were going to buy the property, inquired at the city offices about rezoning or making two lots out of one, which is all this is about, is making two lots out of one. They told me that they were told that they could, this was years ago. I'm not talking about 20 years ago. I've lived there since Troy was a township, 67 years. So I've seen everything and heard everything. And we shouldn't be talking about swamp, but as an example of that, the people next door pulled into that trailer with a trailer and a boat on it about 2 years ago and sank right to the axles of it. But I mean, that's not hard evidence. But that's not, we shouldn't be talking about. My lot is the same size as his, and it's one lot. It's been one lot since before Troy was founded.
I just want to focus on the specific question, sir. Just make sure we're not talking about whether it's appropriate to split the lot. That would be a separate question that we would take up maybe in a minute. I just want to focus on this specific question, whether the February application is the same as this application. I know it may be a little confusing, but I just want to make sure we don't get into that question.
You mean the dimension change?
Well, in February, the applicant sought a split of a certain width, and now he is asking for a lot split, but it's a different dimension, different
It's still
length.
making two lots out of one. I mean, I don't care if he puts a 10-foot here and a 100-foot over there. He wants two houses on one lot.
Okay.
Well, the neighborhood's been there for, like I said, Troy wasn't even a city. I may not look it, but I'm 95 years old, so I've been there. And they used to hold the council meetings right on the corner of Marengo and Rochester Road when it was 2-lane. And I'd peek in the window. They had it was a smokehouse in the back, and he sold smoked meat. And that was Troy. So I know, now everybody wants to bring us more together. Nothing technical, but that's my objection. I'm sorry if I
No, that's
offended
okay.
anybody.
We appreciate longtime residents, and we appreciate your opinion, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Green.
There.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
I'll have a motion, I think.
Hello, members of the board. My name is Patrick McIntyre. I live at 915 Marengo. That would best be described as being kitty corner, the northwest corner of the property in question. And I've lived in Troy too for 52 years. I was mowing the lawn when I was 7 years old for my grandfather. And I could say that, but seems to be the issue, like Carlos said, was make 2 lots out of 1. And I don't pay anybody's taxes, so I don't want to know what they're going to do with it. But, the reason those lots are big, and always have been big, on the end of the street is because there's a commercial zone there. And it's noisy from Rochester Road. When I moved in there, I could never even hear anything. Now it's like a speedway. And, you've got to live with it. I don't think it's a hardship or anything, but for our neighborhood, it looks like it's going to be a hardship because our neighborhood always got along together. We always spoke together. We always agreed. And I was alarmed because I thought, how many times are we going to revisit an issue that is clearly black and white? And I hate it when people, I was a school teacher for 32 years in Lake Orion, and I hate it when people try to throw up darts at each other, but that's human nature when they get hurt. And I was kind of hurt because I thought, why are we going through all this? And there's only 2 reasons I can think of it is, either, want to rent houses out to make money or something, I don't care. But it's not a reason to divide the lot and disturb the peace and, characteristic of the neighborhood we all came to love and live in. There's another thing, I'll touch on the 3rd bullet point I was thinking about. Carl made the first and a second, but the 3rd one is that there's a easement, my neighbor next to me happens to be a high voltage journeyman electrician, and he was like, I don't think they can do that because there's an easement for there's a kitty corner there, there's a store, a poultry farm. And he said there might be an issue with the easement to get to, and it's right in front of, you can put up the slide that would, that Ali, had presented earlier. And you can see it, there's a transformer right there that supplies the power over there, I think. I saw it with my eyes just now, and I saw it earlier today, and I listened to the electrician. So DTE might want to be consulted on this too.
Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you, sir.
That's all I got to say.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm going to close the public hearing now. Thank you for the public comments. And I will offer the applicant an opportunity if he would like to respond to either of the public comments.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to respond. First comment is related to what Mr. Marduskelli said, that he didn't intend to say that it was every member, every previous owner that applied. He just was talking about somebody that was interested in buying the property. Well, that's not what he said in his email. That's not what he said in his letter to the city. He didn't say that I spoke to somebody who is intended to buy the property, and they talked to the city, and the city said you can't split. He said the previous owner of this property applied and was denied. So what he has in writing is very different than what he is trying to course correct here tonight. And related to what Mr. McIntyre said here, the reason why this lot 944 Marengo is a large lot, I already discussed that in the previous meeting. It's not large because it always was large. It was platted small, it was replatted small, and then combined. That's what happened. And the reason why it's large, it's not because it's next to a commercial, because when this whole neighborhood was platted, whatever is commercial on the east side by Rochester, that was residential as well. That was rezoned to commercial in the mid-'80s when that whole shopping center was built. So that's actually incorrect. Mr. McIntyre said this is all black and white. If it would be all black and white, there would be no ZBA. Because the ZBA exists because things are gray sometimes. And the ZBA exists because there needs to be a interpretation or an application of a variance or a deviation from what is black and white. So it's not all black and white. To characterize that a ZBA application or myself as an applicant to imply that I'm throwing darts around, that is an absolute mischaracterization of what's going on here. I have the right to come up here and apply for a variance, and I'm not throwing darts at anybody. That is my legal right, and I'm following the process established by the city. If Mr. McIntyre thinks the process established by the city makes him hurt and it feels like he's getting darts thrown at him, well, I'm very sorry. He needs to take that up with the city because I'm not playing darts. I'm just requesting a variance. And in terms of the poultry farm has nothing to do with my variance in my property. DTE knows what they're doing. They know their business. They know where there are easements. They know where their utility poles are. They know exactly how to access their poles. It has nothing to do with my variance. So what you're hearing tonight, and you might be hearing some more of, is neighbors imposing their concerns and their speculations on my variance. That's not what this should be about. So that's my response. There were no facts presented here. It's just speculation, and you should be concerned. We should be concerned about DTE. DTE should be called in here. Trust me, DTE really knows what they're doing. They know their business way better than any of us in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. We will now take this back to the board for deliberation. Okay, I see Mr. Green, then Mr. Fox. Mr. Green?
If I may, I'd like to move straight to a motion to, or to make a determination. I believe this is a new variance request based on the evidence presented by the applicant.
Second.
Simple as that.
I'd second that.
And I move to consider item C on that basis as a new item.
We have a motion from Mr. Green to treat this as a new variance request, seconded by Mr. Fox. Do I have any other, Mr. McCauley?
I object to that because we have had no discussion on this whatsoever. And I was not present at that February meeting, and I have some comments I would like to make about this.
Okay.
And I feel it's inappropriate to jump to a motion without having discussion.
Well, Mr. Eisenbacher.
If that's a point of order, I mean, we should always have a motion that we discuss. By Robert's rules, it can be made at any point. I mean, we could always start our discussions with a motion. You frame it one way or another.
Okay.
So, Mr. McCauley, would you like to
Yeah,
present?
now we want the thoughts on it.
Comments?
Oh, I'm not going to talk. No. Basically, I wasn't here for the February meeting. And everything that was presented, you gave evidence, which was good evidence to show about the property, and it was supported well. But as I look at the application from February, and after you get past all the he said, she said, new evidence to rebut the comments that were made by residents, bottom line, I look at the option one from January 13th or from February. The split is going from one lot to two non-conforming lots. And I look at that same thing as what we're getting again is it's the same thing, it hasn't changed in my mind. It's the same request. So from my mind, it's still asking for the same thing. He just gave evidence to try and refute what was said, which it's his obligation legally, but from my standpoint, it's very simply, it's the same application. It's just a split.
Mr. Desmond?
Maybe I'm having some confusion here. By bringing it up as a new variance, I thought the premise of him presenting new evidence was that regardless of whether it's a new variance or a rehearing of the same variance, that he doesn't have to wait the year because he's presented these additional elements. So, I mean, does it matter if it's a new variance or a continuation? Because really the premise is just to avoid him having to wait a year to go after it again. And that's why he presented new stuff. Is that new evidence and new, am I mistaken in that?
So I'll give you my thoughts on that. So for the city's memorandum, on the second page, I think articulates the two paths we could go on this. Either if we find they are different, so if the February variance and the April variance are different, then we can simply treat them as a different variance request. That's how we interpret it. Mm-hmm. Or if we treat the April variance request as essentially the same as the February, but we believe the petitioner has submitted new evidence or there were changed conditions, then we could also hear the variance again. That's how I have interpreted the city's memorandum. So there's, I think, two ways to ultimately hear the April, I'll call the April variance request.
But all of this is circumventing the idea that it has to wait another year either direction.
In either case, it's to hear this less than a calendar year, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Fox?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I disagree with the idea that this is the same application. Ultimately, what the ZBA decided at the meeting back in February was that they did not approve a variance of this frontage and this frontage, and now we have completely new numbers, and the applicant's within their right to ask the question, are these frontage requirements fine after the previous ones have been rejected? So, I think that the motion on the floor is appropriate to vote yes, but again, I'm just one of 7 of you, so.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
I agree with those comments. In the past, we had a house on Boyd that asked for the exact same variance 3 different times by 3 different property owners for a split. And they ended up just getting some additional property from the school district that owned the property behind them and not needing a variance. That was the exact same request each time. They waited a year. This is a different layout, so I see it as different.
Okay.
I agree.
Any other discussion? Mr. Green?
Just as a final note, I can understand how it's be a game of inches, right? So what's a different request when we're looking at 2 different frontages when we're accepting it? To me, it's one of those, unfortunately, I know it when I see it. To me, this feels different enough to consider that way. And we take these each independently, and I will take this as such, to me.
Mr. McCauley?
In my opinion, that if we allow this to go forward, then we're setting precedents as far as somebody comes back with a lot split of 70-80, and then the next time they come back 75-75, that's okay. And I disagree with that because it's a lot split, and it was denied. And this is still a lot split, and it's the same thing. Just because the numbers change, it's still a lot split.
But,
Mr. Green?
I'm sorry. We're not, it's not so much the split that we're looking at, it's the variance of frontage. And so that's the difference.
What, okay.
I think we understand each other.
I would say that the precedent that's being set is that they will have an opportunity to ask us the question of if it is all right to be reheard in a new way, and we can make those decisions when we get to those cases. I think that, this is setting the precedent that we will make that decision. And so we'll make that decision tonight and again in the future. So,
Mr. Kincrey.
I see it as the same request as before. It is a lot split, and if you split it differently, and both the lots don't meet the frontage requirements, you're only making one slightly better, whereas at the same time, you're making the other one slightly worse. And so it doesn't really do anything. If it were to make both the lots better, it would have been a different thing. But just by splitting it differently, you're making one lot worse than before. So I'm not there to say that this is something different. I think it actually makes it worse than what you had before, because at the end of it is still a split.
Thank you, Mr. Kincrey. I guess I've seen both sides of the argument on this one. Part of my thought about why, so there's some concern about would there be gamesmanship or resubmitting it just by changing a foot here or there. The counter to that, I guess, practically speaking, is if the same board denied this request and then the applicant comes back in 2 months and it's the same board hearing the same application essentially with a few feet different, I don't know that that's not going to be just a different outcome. I think it could probably be the same outcome and it probably wouldn't be well received by the board unless there's different evidence or something of that nature. All right, well, I tend to believe this is a new variance request because I do think that when you do change the footage, it's not the same as what was presented previously. So I support the motion that would be on the table at this point. Are there any other comments before we move to the vote? We have a motion pending to interpret this as a new variance request. And I believe that was Mr. Green, seconded by Mr. Fox. And I believe we're ready for a vote, Mr. Evans.
Is this a yes to agree?
So the yes would be to agree that this is a new variance.
Okay.
And then we would move on to item 5C, which is to now consider the variance request as it's in its substance.
The vote, Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Desmond,
Yes.
Mr. Bossenbrook,
Yes.
Mr. Fox,
yes.
Mr. McCauley,
No.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Mr. Kincrey.
No.
The motion has passed 5 votes to 2. We will consider this 5C.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
if appropriate for the board, would it be appropriate to take a 10-minute recess?
I
We
was
haven't
just
here
about to
since
suggest that, actually. I think that'd be very appropriate to take a 10-minute recess, stretch our legs, and come back.
Set a timer for 10.
In the session, and we'll move on to item 5C, which is now again 944 Marengo, and we'll take a look at the actual variance request. Mr. Evans, whenever you're ready, you can present to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this is for property at 944 Marengo. This is a variance request to divide a land parcel into two parcels. One proposed parcel will have 77.61 feet width and frontage. The other proposed parcel will have 67.61 feet width and frontage. The zoning ordinance requires a minimum of 100 feet width and frontage. Now, this is an aerial of the neighborhood. We have Rochester Road down the middle of the slide, and South Boulevard is at the top. The subject property, Marengo, is circled in red here. And I'll continue to zoom in on the subject property at 944 Marengo. And the yellow you see is single-family zoning, and the non-yellow you see on this, the west side of Rochester Road, is non-residential use. Now, this is the applicant's proposed split, and showing the various proposed parcel splits. And as was discussed, excuse me, strike that. So I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Questions from members of the board? Mr. Eisenbacher?
I just want to thank you for getting us the information here on the table about the sanitary sewers and the storm sewers in the area, and how they are separate systems. The storm sewer does go through the back of the property, and the newer subdivision to the south does have its own storm sewer system. It appears to be very close to the back of these properties also, in addition to the storm sewer that goes across the back of the properties.
Mr. Green?
Not for the city, sorry.
I'm sorry?
Not for the city.
Okay. For the applicant?
Before we move to that, just he was given an opportunity at 35 minutes.
Okay,
You asked
well,
specifically.
we can-
Like I said, not.
Okay. I think we're set for questions from the... Yes, ma'am. Well, oh, you can't hear me? I apologize. Let me...
Likewise.
All right. Thank you, ma'am, for that clarification. At this point, then, we will ask the applicant to come forward, present on 944. Oh.
Hello? Hello? Okay. Thank you. Good evening again, Mr. Chair. Good evening to the board members. Can you hear me? Is that better?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you again for the opportunity to present this variance request before you this evening. Again, my name is Ali Apahidian. I'm the owner of property located at 944 Marengo, and also attending tonight is my attorney, Mr. Darius Dinkowski from Butzel Lawn. Please accept the following statement of practical difficulty in support of the non-use variance request for this property. The property is a single-family home located in an R1B district. The variance request is for lot frontage dimensions resulting in 2 new lots from the split of the existing lot. The intent is to keep the existing home located on the easterly portion of the property and to keep the vacant lot for possible future development. If and when this newly created vacant lot will get developed, the size, style, floor plan, footprint, setbacks of a future home will be in compliance with all requirements of the building department and the zoning ordinance. A little bit of history on this property. The property has an interesting history dating back almost 100 years. It was originally platted on February 21st, 1925 as part of the Troy Little Farm subdivision. 60 of the 75 lots created in this subdivision had lot widths of 50 feet or less. The property was initially platted as Lot 55, 56, which are 2 buildable lots, and half of Lot 57. Another unique characteristic is the platting of a 20-foot wide public alley between the subject property and the adjacent lots 1, 2, and 3 with frontage on Rochester Road. If we fast forward almost 30 years, public records indicate that the subject property was replatted on July 13, 1953, as part of the newly formed subdivision Clark Estates. The 2.5 lots were all combined to create Lot 1 as reconfigured in the new Clark Estates subdivision, which is Exhibit B in the packet that I submitted with the initial application back in March. In 1953, Troy was still a township and a zoning ordinance had not been written yet. City of Troy records indicate that on June 24, 1957, the city's first zoning ordinance, number 23-1, was created. The existing house on this property was built prior to the lot being zoned as R1B under the newly implemented zoning ordinance. The basis for the variance request relates to the property width requirements under section 4.06C of the Troy zoning ordinance. This section requires that the property zoned R1B have a minimum road frontage width of 100 feet. The proposed split of Lot 1 would result in 2 new lots. Parcel A will have lot frontage of 77.61 feet, and the requested lot frontage variance of Parcel A is 22.39 feet. Parcel B will have a lot frontage of 67.61 feet. The requested lot frontage variance for Parcel B is 32.39 feet. The newly created parcels A and B otherwise will be in compliance with all other dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance. The existing home remaining on the Parcel B will be in compliance with all other requirements of the zoning ordinance that are relevant for a single-family home in an R1B district. The standard for granting a non-use variance is more lenient than for a use variance. The precedent for non-use variance has been established by case law, explained in the application packet I submitted back in March. It's not necessary to show unnecessary hardship, and showing practical difficulty is sufficient. A detailed analysis of the properties on Marengo Drive that are part of Clark Estates subdivision provides substantial evidence that the proposed variance request will result in 2 lots, Parcel A and B, that will match harmoniously with the existing character of the neighborhood. I'd like to briefly go over 3 aspects of the future vacant lot as proposed by this variance application. The first is a lot frontage. 22 of the 26 properties on Marengo that are part of this subdivision have lot frontages of 80 feet and not 100 feet. 15 of these 22 homes were built after the neighborhood was zoned R1B, which means 15 houses on Marengo were built on non-conforming lots. Lots which did not meet the dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance at the time the houses were built. Next is the width of the houses on Marengo. The average width of these 26 houses is 50 feet. The maximum width of a future house that could be built on this vacant lot with the required side yard setbacks will be approximately 49 feet. That fits right in with the majority of the houses on this street. And the last feature I want to discuss is the distance between the houses in this neighborhood. Exhibit E I submitted with the application packet shows that approximate distance between a future home on this proposed lot and the existing home to the west is about 38 feet. That's 7 feet more than the average side yard distance between all the existing homes on Marengo. Exhibit E also shows that the approximate distance between a future home on this lot and the existing home, 944 Marengo, is 29 feet. That's 2 feet within the average of the side yard distance between all the existing homes on Marengo. The detailed analysis of the lot frontage, house widths, and distances between houses provides clear evidence that the 2 lots resulting from the requested variance will match harmoniously and contiguously with the other lots and existing homes on Marengo Drive. Analysis of practical difficulties. A literal interpretation of the dimensional requirements would involve practical difficulties resulting from the exceptional characteristics of the subject property, namely the lot frontage width of the property. The second exceptional characteristic of this property is the physical placement of the home relative to the property lines. Although this house was built without a zoning ordinance to govern its placement on the property, the fact that it was constructed so far to the east would strongly suggest that the first owner might have had the forethought and/or the intent to allow for a future lot split and a home to be built on the large side yard to the west. No other property on Marengo is on such a large lot with an existing house so far to one side of the property to provide more than enough room for another house to be built next to it. The third exceptional characteristic is that 944 Marengo is the largest lot on Marengo Drive in Clark Estates subdivision, the largest lot frontage, and the largest lot area. It's larger than the property across the street at 943 Marengo, and it's larger by 3,659 square feet, 3,659 square feet, even than the commercial property directly adjacent to the east that has an almost 4,800 square foot building on it. These three exceptional characteristics of this property meet the first standard for practical difficulty. These exceptional characteristics are related directly to the property for which the variance is sought and not for some other location. This meets the second standard for practical difficulty. These exceptional characteristics are not of a personal nature. This meets the third standard for practical difficulty. These exceptional characteristics were not created by the current or previous property owner. Their characteristics were created by platting modifications that occurred more than 75 years ago. The characteristics were created due to the replatting of the property in 1953 from its original plat in 1925. This replatting took multiple legally buildable lots and combined them into one lot. The characteristics are also a result of the new zoning ordinance that was imposed on the property constructed prior to the existing ordinance that came to effect later. This meets the fourth standard for practical difficulty. The proposed variance will not alter the essential character of the surrounding area or otherwise result in any harmful or negative consequences. The proposed split will not have any negative aesthetic impact on the surrounding area because the lot frontage of the property of Parcel A will be only 28.7 inches. That's this much. Less than 22 of the 26 lots on Marengo Drive with lot frontages of 80 feet. The vacant lot resulting from this split will only be 3% smaller in width, and the area will be only 3% smaller in width and area than the 22 properties on Marengo that are 80 feet wide. Parcel B with the existing house is directly adjacent to the business property fronting on Rochester Road and not to any other home on Marengo. There are thousands of homes in Troy built on lots that are smaller, the same or smaller in frontage and area than the two lots resulting from this split, and many of those homes are in an R1B district, not an R1C or R1D or R1E, similar to what we saw here in the previous item on the agenda. Whitetail Court, Amber Court, St. Paul Road, Westminster Avenue, Paragon Drive, Lang Drive, Superior Drive, Finch Drive, and many other streets have houses on lots less than 77 feet that is being proposed right there. Paragon and Lang have houses on 53-foot lots. Finch has houses built in 2014 on 76-foot lots. All these houses were built in an R1B district without any variances for lot frontage. And I can assure you I did my due diligence, and I know that for a fact, 100% sure that none of these have a lot variance request for them. The proposed variance will not result in any harmful or negative environmental consequences. Local and state public records indicate that no wetland areas exist on the subject property, and the property is not in a floodplain. The photographs presented earlier is undeniable evidence that the property is not in a floodplain, and it refutes any comments suggesting that the property is a flooded swamp. I'm going to present to you another photograph that was not part of that, and this was taken just yesterday. if anybody else needs the most recent evidence of the property, the front, the side, and the rear, multiple images of the property, that it's not flooded or a swamp. The granting of the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the ordinance. The proposed variance will not impair the supply of air or light. Any future home that could be built on the resulting vacant lot will comply with all the requirements of the Troy Building Department, Troy Engineering Department, and national and local building codes. The proposed variance will not unreasonably increase traffic congestion. Any future home built on the resulting vacant lot can be expected to generate similar vehicular traffic volume and patterns as similar homes on Marengo Drive or other single-family properties on similar public roads in the city of Troy. The vacant lot resulting from this variance would become the second property on the south side of Marengo Drive, just west of Rochester Road, a major thoroughfare in the city of Troy. The close proximity of Parcel A to Rochester Road will provide immediate and direct access for all vehicular traffic resulting from any future residents who might occupy any future home constructed on Parcel A. The proposed variance will not increase the danger of fire or endanger public safety. Any real or perceived safety issues related to street lighting, absence of sidewalks, or other similar concerns are pre-existing conditions established or allowed by city administration, are outside the scope of this variance request, and will not be impacted negatively or negatively affected in any way by the legal description change of this property from one parcel to two. Any future home that could be built on the resulting vacant lot will comply with all the requirements of the Troy Building Department, the state building codes, national building codes, and the International Fire Code. Any future home that could be built on this vacant lot resulting from this variance request will not endanger the public safety in any significantly measurable or tangible way that is different than the existing homes on Marengo Drive. The proposed variance will not diminish or impair established property values within the area. It can easily be argued that this variance will only increase the property value in the immediate area. This proposed variance will not impair the public health of the inhabitants of Troy. Splitting one parcel into two does not pose any health dangers to anyone in the neighborhood. The proposed variance request will not impair the comfort of the inhabitants of Troy. Splitting the subject property into two will not prohibit the residents of Marengo Drive from continuing to enjoy the use of their own property, their own private properties, the same way they have up until now. The proposed variance will not impair the morals of the inhabitants of Troy. This variance request has no impact on an individual's personal choice of morals and ethical principles by which they choose to live. The proposed variance will in no way be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the general welfare of the inhabitants of Troy. The granting of this variance does not prohibit any resident on Marengo Drive to continue living a meaningful and purposeful life to the fullest extent possible. Any potential future construction on the vacant lot resulting from this variance will be required to meet the stringent standards of the Troy Building Department and the Troy Engineering Department. A required site plan will guarantee that stormwater management, soil erosion and sedimentation control, sanitary sewer, the driveway approach, and any other site requirements will meet or exceed the city's design requirements. Any possible future development of Parcel A will only result in significant improvements to the site and not be a detriment to the neighborhood in any way. There are no practical considerations that support a literal enforcement of the width requirement in this instance, and granting this variance request will serve in the interest of justice. And for all these reasons, for all the aforementioned reasons, the fifth and final standard for practical difficulty is met. In conclusion, as a petitioner, I will face practical difficulties if the width requirement is enforced literally as a result of the exceptional characteristics of the subject property. By granting the requested variance, the spirit of the ordinance will be observed, the surrounding area will not be negatively impacted, and the substantial justice will be done. And finally, and most importantly, the facts and conditions of practical difficulty prescribed in section 15.01 subsection E2 of the zoning ordinance have been met. For all these reasons, I respectfully request that the Zoning Board of Appeals grant this variance request. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any member of the board wish to ask a question of the applicant? Mr. McCauley?
The current house that's there, when was it built?
It was built in 1956.
When was the last time it was inhabited?
It was inhabited a few months ago when I bought the home. It'd been continually rented for the past 42 years by the previous owner. That was information he gave me.
Thank you.
Mr. Green?
In the previous point, in 5B, you had said that this was not a single variance, it was two variances for the frontage of these two separate properties contingent on a split. Do you hold to that? I just want to make sure I understand.
Can you please clarify your question? I'm not quite sure.
Are you
Mr. Green?
Yeah,
I think you need to speak louder.
I believe that's fair. Sorry. So are you, in 5B, in your addressing of the board, you had said that the reason that this was a different variance, and I'm not attempting to rehash that, is because the previous one was for two variances of setback for Lot A and Lot B. And as I understand it, that's what you're looking for here. You're asking for two variances of setback, which would permit the split. Is that accurate?
Just to clarify your point, I'm not requesting variances for setback at all. I never did, and I'm not today. What I'm requesting is lot frontage variances.
Pardon? Yes.
2 lot frontage variances. I'm not requesting any variances for setback for a property, for setback of an existing structure. I'm not requesting anything related to that.
Yes, and apologies. Absolutely. The width was the two approximately equal widths, frontages, and this is two separate. But the main consideration that I'm asking about is, as you understand, you were asking for two variances of frontage width for these.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Each lot requires its own variance.
Yes.
There are 2 separate variances, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
At this point, I will open public hearing. Again, if a member of the public wishes to, sir, you can, again, come up to the podium. And once again, if you could identify yourself, your address, and direct your comments to the variance request tonight. Thank you.
Hello, Pat McIntyre, 915 Marengo, Troy 48085. I think that we have to consider not, the property in relation to all the property around in Troy or in the, in the big multi-block neighborhood, but we should consider the houses that are immediately around this particular property in question, or properties. If you're living next to this, and I'd like to say that, no, it's not classified as a wetland and everything else, but I was there, to dig the trenches and put in drain tube and peat pebble in order for you to be able to walk off your deck.
Sir, can you
Yes,
get into the
I'll
microphone?
address this too, but my neighbor, and I was there when the boat sank, and I was there when a truck sank. I mean, there's no question. I'm not calling it a swamp. There are no muskrats, but there are people that live next door, very close, and in order to build a house here, obviously crushed concrete or dirt or whatever would have to raise, the level equal to the other houses just adjacent to it and around it. Where's the water gonna go now? And it is behind, not his property per se, but the property behind it is a drain. And you pointed that out. I mean, there's no question about that. So that's, one consideration. And I didn't suggest that I knew better than DTE. I suggested that a journeyman that lives next door to me pointed it out that it should be checked out because he believed it was so. So, I mean, it's just an option to check out, obviously, but it's a point. But every house that's around it is going to have to deal with another house right on top of it. Not the houses down the street, they don't care. But the people that live right around that neighborhood care. And so, I would take a little bit of offense to it because when you separate a lot and it's more than a little bit of percentage of area. It's a lot of area when you multiply length times the width of this compared to the properties right around it. I don't know
Sir,
about
could I ask
1925, but I do know that, this property's been the same way for many years, and not only on Marengo, but Dieta, Lovell, so on and so forth. I mean, it makes sense to me that it would be quieter, provide, the property's a commercial on the end of the street. Yeah, it was converted. So what? It's commercial now. So I'm not quite sure I would agree, and I don't think I'm trying to speak for my neighbors that came, and I listened to them, and I thought, it's not time to get emotional about anything. It's not time to make fun of anybody or say you threaten or sue, swamp, whatever. But people get angry when it comes because it is a monetary inconvenience. And I happen to know that if you wanted to sell your house after another house just got built right on top of you on a smaller lot and for whatever purpose, it's not going to raise your property value. It can't. So it's a nice piece of property. It'd be beautiful to have a house that could have a big yard or something like that, but it's not going to raise anybody's improvement in life to have this thing split. And that's all I got to say. If there aren't any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And if there's any other comments from the neighborhood.
Can we just make sure we pick up your voice?
If there's any other comments from the neighborhood, let's, we can entertain that. So,
What was your address again, sir?
915. I'm diagonally across the street.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let me just make sure. Does any member of the board wish to pose a question? We appreciate you coming up here and sharing everything you shared. We really appreciate it, the input.
And likewise, appreciate, a zoning board that, is functional and following procedure.
We try to.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and any other members of the public wish to step forward? Ma'am, podium is yours.
My name's Tracy Reedman, and I live next door.
Can you step up to the microphone before you just repeat your name, please?
Okay. I live at 926 Marengo Drive, next door to the proposed lot.
Thank you. Welcome.
We went through all this before about safety. We know it's the gateway to Marengo. We have children playing. We've discussed all this before. All I'm going to say to you guys is now, you make the ordinance. There's not enough room. He needs 100 feet. If you let this go through, you're going to open a can of worms, and everybody is going to be coming and scrambling for land. He knew when he bought the property, there was not enough room for another home. How many times have we been here now? And we still have to go through the same thing. And I feel threatened by his lawyer being there because he's taking notes. And you asked him to calm down. This is a meeting. This is about a neighborhood getting together. You asked, when we came last time, you asked the people that were here before we cancelled it because he said he did not receive his letter. You asked them, did you go to the neighborhood and did you discuss anything with your neighbors? Did you ask them what they thought? Some people do that. It's called being courteously and going to a neighbor. He never came over. I offered him a cup of coffee and to help him do work on that house. That's what we do. But when you have a lawyer sitting there taking notes, what, we can't speak and say what we want to say because we feel intimidated? Is that what this meeting's all about? It's wrong. You make the ordinance, stick by it, not for the money that you're going to get for taxes and revenue. You made the ordinance. What you made should stick. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. The applicant is entitled to have counsel, and this is a public hearing, so everything is recorded. But I appreciate everyone's comments. I know this is a very emotional and opinionated appeal, and I appreciate everyone who's coming forward to speak. Is there another member of the public who would like to address this variance request? Please feel free to step forward. We would love to hear from you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm Barb Webb. I live at 787 Marengo Drive. I'm a 37-year resident of Marengo Drive. I was born in Oakland County. May I ask you, do you have reference to the letters that were submitted in the emails by me and the other from the what was supposed to be the April 18th hearing? So,
yes, ma'am. We have yes, we have a few letters from residents. We have your letter.
Yes.
And Mr. Eisenbacher, we'll read these at some point in the record, but we do have a couple other letters as well from concerned residents.
Okay, I just wondered because I didn't know if you were going to read my letter.
You're welcome to read your letter if you'd like. We were also going to reference it.
Okay, so it will be read by Mr. Eisenbacher.
You're welcome to read it as well, but Mr. Eisenbacher can read it.
Okay. Well, if he's going to read it, then I guess I don't have to. But thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to add beyond what's in your letter?
Yes, let's do a little math. The ordinance is 100 square feet per lot. If we have two lots, 100 plus 100 is 200. What is 200 minus 144? And that's all I have to add to this meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to address the board? Not seeing anyone. I will wait. Mr. Eisenbacher, we do have some written correspondence if you would like to share those.
Yep. First is from James Zambowski. Once again, 944 Marengo is up for variance. I disagree with this new proposal, and it should not be approved. The owner does not live at this property, nor his other one at 826 Marengo. His request for variance is less than 80 feet in width, which is what the other homes on the block is unreasonable, especially on the request for a property width of 67.6 feet. His actual home on Tucker Drive is close to an acre, 0.8. The variance is less than the existing properties and less than the 100-foot zoning width. This is my opinion. Okay, and then the next one is from Ms. Webb. On February 21st, 2023, I spoke to you regarding 944 Marengo Drive. The appeal was denied to Ali Apahidin. What is it about no that he does not understand? Now he has filed another appeal. Sources indicate Ali Apahadim purchased 944 Marengo Drive on December 30th, 2022. Less than 2 weeks later, the Troy Assessing Department denied his request for a split of property. On January 12th, he filed an application to the Zoning Board of Appeals. An appeal hearing was held on February 21st, and his request was denied. On March 10th, he made a new request to split 944 Marengo Drive, which was denied by the Assessing Department. He appealed on March 13th. The current appeal is scheduled to be heard on April 18th. I have lived here 37 years and am totally against this for the following reasons. Ali Apahidian did not live on Marengo Drive. His interests lie in real estate investments and making a profit. He claims the split will result in 2 lots that will match harmoniously with the existing character of the neighborhood. This is untrue. Proposed parcel B would have a 67.61 feet, which is 33.39% below the city's 100-foot requirement. The proposal of 77.61-foot lot is 22.39% below the zoning ordinance requirement of 100-foot width frontage. To maintain the aesthetics of the street, we want the ratio of the 100-foot lots, of 80-foot lots and 100-foot lots or wider to remain the same. There are 6 lots on Marengo Drive that reflect the 2023 requirement of a minimum 100-foot width and frontage. All 6 lots are gateways to Marengo Drive. Some are on the east and some are on the west end of Marengo Drive. Ali Apahidian also erroneously states that any future home built on the resulting vacant lot can be expected to have a similar vehicular traffic flow and patterns as the other homes on Marengo Drive. This is wrong. And the fact that it's a gateway to Marengo Drive means it's going to get more traffic than the rest of the houses on the street. Furthermore, keep in mind parking and mailboxes are only allowed on the south side of Marengo Drive. Several residents get their medication by mail. The postal employees won't deliver mail if cars are parked in front or too close to mailboxes. It must also be restated that at this appeal meeting, the Marengo Drive doesn't have sidewalks or streetlights. Several children ride bikes up and down Marengo Drive. For these reasons, I believe the Zoning Board of Appeals should continue to deny the request to split 944 Marengo Drive. And that's what I have on the table. Nope. Oh, 92 from, there's also one more. From Dennis Reedman, 926 Marengo Drive. That's next door. This gentleman spoke. So he already spoke, so it contained the information in this letter. Okay. All right.
With that, I believe we have all of our written correspondence and our public comments taken, so we will close the public hearing. And we'll give the applicant opportunity, if he wishes, to offer any response to public comment.
Thank you again for the opportunity for public comment. I'm going to first address the comments that were in writing, that were emailed or sent by letter, and then I'd like to address some of the comments that were made here in person by the members of the public. I'd like to address the letter that was sent by Mr. Reedman, even though you did not read it, because Mr. Reedman is actually not here this evening. He did not speak this evening. He was here at the first public meeting back in February. And would you like to read his comments before I comment on his comments?
Yes.
In the public record?
Corrected. The other homeowner spoke this evening.
I'm okay with you want to read that, just
Okay,
to
I
have
can
it in
read
front
it.
of us.
Yes. Okay, so this is from 926 Marengo Drive, Dennis Reedman. I would like to start by asking how this case comes back in front of you so quickly. You denied this request last month. What has changed? During his His opening last meeting, Mr. Ali stated he would respect the board's decision. He obviously did not respect your decision as he is back here in front of you 30 days later. I find it amazing that a person can buy a house at the end of December 2022, apply to divide a land parcel that he knew did not meet the city zoning ordinance when he purchased it, get denied by the city for said divide, apply for an appeal to evenly split the parcel, again knowingly it is against city zoning ordinance, get denied and get another appeal to divide the proposed 77.61 foot width on one lot and 67.61 feet on another lot, knowing both lots would not meet zoning ordinance, all within less than 4 months. Mr. Ali has experienced at this as he did it in another lot in the neighborhood. He was able to split the lot and a rental home was built. The difference is the other lot made the 80-foot to be in harmony with the rest of the houses in the neighborhood. Once the house was built, it is not in harmony with the rest of the houses since it is larger than the average existing home. Where does the line get drawn? When these investors find they can get the city to bend the rules, they will not stop. I suspect Mr. Ali will try to convince the board that his proposal will be configured to other lots in the subdivision. They clearly do not. On his own map during the last meeting, he showed all the other lots have 80 foot or more of width. If this lot was split, neither lot would make the minimum of the current lots in the subdivision. One would be more than 10% short. They would not even be close to the city ordinance requirement. There are other conditions the board needs to consider about the neighborhood. As I stated at the last meeting, there is a major concern with drainage and flooding. My house next door has a crawl space with a sump pump. The pump runs regularly due to the water table being so low. The unused portion of his lot is a low spot that the water drains to. If this area were built up, to build on it would cause more water to drain to my house and his existing house. He himself complained of the mold problem the house had when he purchased it. I helped a tenant move from that house a little over a year ago. The house had a lot of mold due to the moisture content under and in the house. Sewage is another concern. During a storm last year, my sewer backed up. I called a plumber that came out and cleared my sewer line. Once cleared, it still was not flowing correctly, so he lifted 2 manhole covers to a main line and showed me that it was draining slow and had a possible blockage. He recommended I call the city to have the main line cleared. I called the city. They came out within a few hours. When I spoke to the person, explained the situation, he lifted the lids on the manholes and said they were flowing properly, but they were probably at their max capacity. Adding another house would make this situation worse. It would add more sewage to an already overloaded system. I am not the only house that has had this problem. My neighbor on the opposite side of this had their sewer back up into their basement last year during a storm. They lost several items during that backup. Parking is another concern. If vehicles are parked within 15 feet of a mailbox, the mail carrier will not deliver the mail. This has happened on a few occasions when my other neighbors had a guest and they park on the street. Adding a driveway and another mailbox would worsen this situation. Congestion is another concern. Being so close to Rochester Road, a main road, creates hazard for pedestrians in the neighborhood. There are no sidewalks or streetlights in the neighborhood. Several people walk these streets throughout the day and night. When cars turn left into Marengo Drive from Rochester Road, they tend to accelerate quickly to beat traffic. Adding another house so close to this corner would cause more risk for pedestrians being injured or car accidents happening. Another factor that isn't being looked at is the end lots close to Rochester Road on this and neighboring subdivisions are all the same size. Taking this fact into consideration doesn't put the split in harmony with the neighborhood. The power pole in the back of the property is another concern. I called DTE at least 2 to 3 times to tighten the power lines to keep the lines from damaging the roof of my garage. 2 years ago, the pole snapped and DTE had to come in and replace the pole. This pole had a transformer on it that has been knocked out by squirrels twice in the 13 years I have lived here. I don't know that there would be room for a repair truck to access the pole if another house is built next to me. It cannot be accessed from my yard. I have spoken to several people in the neighborhood and I have found one person that thinks splitting this lot is a good idea. It was attempted several times by the previous owner and was consistently denied. Unless the city of Troy changes 100-foot width ordinance for the entire city, I don't see any reason this lot should be an exception. The city needs to stop allowing people trying to cram a house into every nook and cranny and abide by their own ordinances. How can you expect people to take city ordinances seriously if the city itself doesn't follow its ordinances? I hope this board takes into account these considerations and makes the right decision to not allow this split. It is not in harmony with the neighborhood, and the people living here do not want it. Dennis Reedman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Eisenbacher.
Thank you. I'd like to first respond to Mr. Reedman's email. His first question is, how is this possible? It's possible because the process of the Troy Planning Department allows any property owner to submit an application for a variance request, and that's what I did. The variance request that was heard by this board back in February of this year was a completely different request. That request is closed, and I stand before you today with a completely different variance request. The lot frontages are different, the lot areas are different. It's a brand-new application. Submitting a brand-new application does not mean I disrespect the decision of the ZBA on a completely different application. It just means I'm exercising my right to submit a different proposal, what I consider an approved proposal. Mr. Reedman stated that he's amazed that a person can buy a property and apply for a variance to split that property. My response is simply that I have a legal right, just like any of you up here, just like Mr. Reedman, and just like any other legal citizen of this country, to buy property and follow the processes established and permitted by state laws in the City Hall. Mr. Reedman stated that I, quote, I have experience at this. I'm not sure what he means by at this, but if he means that I have experience at following the law and following the process established by the zoning ordinance, if that's what he means and if that's what he's referring to, then yes, I do have experience at this, and anyone has the right to gain such experience if they so choose to. Mr. Reedman stated that a rental was built on a vacant lot on Marengo. That is factually incorrect. The newest home that was built on this street is owner-occupied and was never a rental. The assessing department records can confirm that fact. Mr. Reedman also said, quote, when these investors find they can get the city to bend the rules, they will never stop, end quote. I take offense to that inaccurate accusatory statement because I've never once asked any city official or employee to bend any rules for me. Requesting a zoning variance is an equal right every property owner is granted by the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act and by the Troy Planning Department and by the zoning ordinance. And then Mr. Reedman again mentions the draining and flooding of this lot, which is in the letter that we've already established the facts back at item 5B. The evidence is overwhelming that this is not a swamp. And for this record again, this property has zero wetland. It's not a marsh, it's not a swamp, it's not in a floodplain, it's not the neighborhood retention pond. It's just a nice open yard with a nice lawn and a few trees. And if you drove by the property within the last week, you would have seen exactly that, a green lawn just like thousands of other lawns throughout the city. When a vacant lot is developed and graded per the standards of the engineering department, the positive drainage established removes storm runoff from the property without negatively impacting adjacent properties. The reality about the drainage that Mr. Reedman failed to mention in his email is this, that his property is higher than mine and it's sloped toward my property. When it rains, water from his property comes to my property and not the other way around. That's the actual fact. Water doesn't run uphill, it runs downhill. And the water flows and then also his two-car garage is about 7 feet from my property line. It has no gutters. So when it rains, all the water drains off the roof into his side yard, which is sloped crossing into my property, and the water from his garage runs onto my property. So it's exactly the opposite of what he's actually saying in that letter. I called the city engineer and I asked him about this issue of what's going on with drainage on his property, not mine. And the city engineer recommended I contact Mr. Reedman and request that he regrade his property and prevent storm runoff from coming onto my property. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Reedman is welcome to fix his drainage issues on his property anytime he'd like. Mr. Reedman said I complained to him about the condition of the house I bought. That is absolutely false. To set the record straight, the first and only time I ever spoke to Mr. Reedman in person was on February 25th, 2023, and I keep records of everything, as you can tell. I don't make things up. When I placed these small orange flags on the property line to identify the property line between our two properties, the purpose was so that my landscape guy knows where up to mow the grass to. Mr. Reedman and his wife, which spoke here this evening from 926 Marengo, came storming out of their house, threatening to call the cops and get me arrested because I put orange flags on the property line. It was ridiculous. Mr. Reedman goes on to discuss his problems with the sewer line backing up. He is somehow trying to convince you that my variance request has something to do with his sewer problem. This is absolutely ridiculous. He claims that the city employee told him that the sewer system on Marengo reached its max capacity, and from that he draws the conclusion that the system can't handle one more house with a few toilets and sinks and showers. It shouldn't and it wouldn't take much to debunk that misrepresentation of the city sewer system. A simple phone call to our Public Works Department would undoubtedly explain to anyone who cares about facts that our city sewer system is quite robust and has more than enough capacity to handle the waste from one more potential single-family residence on Marengo. Mr. Reedman's sewer problems are his problems and his problems alone. They have nothing to do with me or my property and my variance request I submitted. Then Mr. Reedman mentions the parking on the street and location of the mailbox. If the mailbox needs to be relocated in the future to accommodate the placement of a new driveway, that can easily be resolved in the future. That has nothing to do with my variance request. Then Mr. Reedman talks about DTE utility poles that's on the property line between our two properties, just like the other neighbor spoke here about this evening. He is concerned that a future house on this new lot would prevent DTE access to the pole. DTE has over 16 poles in the rear yards of houses on Marengo Drive. I'm sure DTE knows exactly how to access every single one of those poles for maintenance or repair work. Then Mr. Reedman states that he spoke with several people in the neighborhood who don't think splitting this lot is a good idea. First of all, that's hearsay. I can stand before you right now and say the same thing, that I spoke with several people in the neighborhood and they all think splitting the property is a great idea. Would you accept that as fact? Probably not, because it would also be considered hearsay. Mr. Reedman states that the previous owner requested to split this property multiple times and was denied. That is factually incorrect, as I stated earlier. The previous owner owned this property for 40 years, and not once did he submit an application to the planning department requesting a lot split. And the planning department also confirmed this in writing, that there is no such application ever submitted in the past 50, 60, 70 years since 1956 when this house was built. Mr. Reedman stated that the city needs to stop allowing people to cram a house in every nook and cranny. With all due respect, no one is cramming anything anywhere. First of all, this variance request is not for the construction of a house. That needs to be made very, very clear. This is not a request for a construction of a house. It's for lot frontage dimensional variance. This vacant lot would be virtually the same as Mr. Reedman's minus 28 inches. There have been thousands of houses built in Troy on lot 77 feet wide and smaller, and many of those houses in R1B zoning district, just like on Marengo. The city planning and the city council and the city planning commission consistently express their welcome for new quality housing in Troy, especially for the missing middle. Mr. Reedman is entitled to his own opinions, but not his own facts. So much of the information in his email is factually inaccurate. The role of this board is to make decisions based on the facts and not based on emotional hyperbole. Unfortunately, we've seen what happens when this board ignores the facts. We've seen it. It happens. It opens up the city to litigation. And that's exactly what happened a few years ago. I'm not going to go into that. The applicant was denied. He filed a lawsuit. The city lost. It cost city taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that required the planning department to even change the zoning ordinance because of this lawsuit. I'm not going to even get into that detail, but Mr. Matson, he can fill you guys all in on that. lawsuit, what happened, and all the debacle and the ugliness of a lawsuit of discrimination. Mr. Reedman's past personal challenges in his sewer line backups, squirrels knocking out transformers, and the business of Rochester Road have nothing to do with my variance request. They are a distraction from the facts and the evidence that clearly prove that this variance request meets all the criteria required for approval. I'm going to address Ms. Webb's comments in her letter.
Mr. Apahedian.
Yes.
I'm not going to curtail your right to respond, but I'm wondering how long of prepared notes you have. Is there some way to sort of condense what you want to say? I think we generally understand what you're saying. We want to give you the opportunity to respond to specific claims, but
I would love to condense my response, but a couple weeks ago, I had a meeting with Mr. Motzny in his office for 1 hour, and we discussed my variance request, and I said, how should I present this? Because I would like to condense my presentation, and I proposed a request to condense it, and your board denied that, the first thing before on the agenda. You denied the request to condense my request, and you split it into two, and now we got two, and Mr. Motzny even preferred that it would be condensed, and now we have two uncondensed versions of it. And Mr. Motzny, I said, how do I handle this situation with all the facts and the evidence of rebutting information that was inaccurately presented by neighbors? And he said, it's your job to rebut everything that you think is inaccurate and false, and that lies on you. So it's my responsibility and my job. Nobody's going to do it for me, and that's what I'm doing here tonight. I need to present you all the evidence and all the information to rebut information that is false presented against me and against my variance request, and that's all I'm doing simply. And I wish I could condense it, but the neighbors didn't condense their emails to 3 sentences, and neither can I to respond and rebut information that is inaccurate. So that's my response to that, unfortunately.
Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
I understand it's getting late, and I wish we all have things to go to, but that's the nature of this situation in a variance request where neighbors present information that is not accurate, and I have an opportunity and not obligation to rebut that information.
Please respond as you need to respond, sir.
Ms. Webb, who is in the audience right here, and you read her email. Mm-hmm. She starts off her letter by questioning my rights to apply for a variance request as a property owner. Very emphatically, she asks, what is it about no that he doesn't understand? My answer is simple. What is it about the process that Ms. Webb doesn't understand? What is it about the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act that Ms. Webb doesn't understand? Ms. Webb, in this case, you didn't know the Michigan Enabling Act, the Troy zoning ordinance, and the process established by the Troy assessing and planning departments allow a property owner to apply for a lot split in a variance request as many times as they would like. It sounds like Ms. Webb and Mr. Reedman and other neighbors are having a hard time accepting the fact that as a legal resident of this state, I have a legal right to buy a piece of property and follow the established processes by the law to request a variance. You read here that Ms. Webb said she's against me receiving a variance request because I don't live on Marengo. Since when is it okay to discriminate against someone based on what street they live on or they don't live on? Since when is it okay to put variance applicants into segregated categories? The neighbor next door category and the property owner who's not my neighbor category. It's shocking and disturbing that there are still people around who are willing to publicly request a quasi-judicial body to discriminate against another resident of the city just because he doesn't live on that street. I wonder if Ms. Webb would actually advocate in favor of my variance request if I was one of her next door neighbors. The days of housing segregation and discrimination are long gone. The last time I checked, it's illegal for city administration or public bodies like the ZBA to discriminate against somebody based on where they live. Ms. Webb then continues to make another disturbing statement. She says, quote, I'm totally against this because his interests lie in real estate investment and making a profit, end quote. That is pure speculation. At the zoning board meeting back in February, all of you here heard a lot of speculation, and you took it as fact. And I hope you don't do the same thing again this night. That is pure speculation. Ms. Webb has no way of knowing what my interests are. She has no way. And yet she makes such a claim with absolute certainty. If this was a court of law and a witness would make such an unsubstantiated comment, there would be an immediate opposition and objection. Speculation should be given zero consideration and credence in this type of a meeting. Ms. Webb goes on to talk about how the lots resulting from the proposed lot split are not going to be 100 feet wide. When Ms. Webb's house was built in 1970, her lot didn't meet the ordinance requirement of 100 either. And yet she's been happily living in the house for 37 years that was built on a non-conforming lot, and so were 14 other homes on Marengo. There are thousands of homes in Troy that are the same size or smaller. If she would have been around in Troy in 1970 to fight against the lots that are smaller than 100, maybe her own house would have never been built. Ms. Webb talked about traffic flow and traffic pattern. It's quite apparent that Ms. Webb has very little knowledge, if any, about the traffic flow and traffic patterns resulting from the construction of a future single-family home in a neighborhood. It has nothing to do with the vehicles driving by a certain property, but it has everything to do with the additional traffic generated by the occupants of that home based on the national standards of trip generation manual of the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Then Ms. Webb states that the parking and mailboxes are only on the south side of the street and some residents get medication by mail. The variance request before you is has no negative impact on mailboxes, locations, and street parking. The residents can pick up their medication just as the same as they did before this property is even split. Ms. Webb correctly mentions that the Marengo does not have street lights or sidewalks. This observation has absolutely no bearing on my variance. The city's administration decision that was probably made many years ago, and it is what it has. It is what it is until somebody actually decides to change it. Then the all-time classic objection Ms. Webb has, and so did the other neighbor here have this, or 926 Marengo property owner to this variance request, is because children ride, she opposes the variance request because children ride their bikes up and down Marengo or they play in the street. The children who ride their bikes on Marengo are the children of Ms. Webb's neighbors. If Ms. Webb is genuinely concerned about these children, their safety, maybe she should be talking to the parents of the kids. If Ms. Webb would call and complain to Mr. Bill Hootery, the city traffic engineer, and our police chief, Mr. Frank Nastasi, they would both tell her that Marengo is not a playground for kids. It's a public roadway intended for motor vehicles, not for kids' bikes. To me, it's pretty obvious that Ms. Webb is trying hard to tie all her concerns and worries to my property and my variance request. Parking issues, mailbox problems, no light, no street lights, no sidewalks, kids on bikes. These are all the existing conditions that have nothing to do with my variance request. It sounds like she's trying to use me as a scapegoat for her problems that she might have been frustrated for 37 years living on Marengo. The role of this board is not to take the neighbors' grievances and indiscriminately tag them onto an applicant's variance request. I will be addressing Ms. Webb's last sentence. She says, quote, and this is in her letter, I believe the Zoning Board of Appeals should continue to deny all the Apahidians' requests, end quote. Interesting comment, considering that on February 21st, 2023, Ms. Webb stood right here and spoke the following words, quote, I'm not for or against anybody. Those were her words. I think it's a very disingenuous for Ms. Webb to make such a dishonest comment because in this letter she says pretty clear that she's against me and against my variance. Then Mr. Zabowski from 801. He also disagrees with my variance request because I don't live on Marengo. Once again, suggesting to this board not to approve a variance request based on where I live and where I don't live. He also thinks it's okay to discriminate against somebody just because they don't live on their street. The fact of the matter is that what pertains to this variance doesn't really matter where I live. It doesn't matter if I live in an apartment. It doesn't matter if I live on a 1-acre property. It doesn't even matter if I live in the city. All that doesn't matter. It's illegal to discriminate against a ZBA applicant that comes before you here with a request just because they don't live on a certain street. It's that simple. That drawing right there shows 801, the property at 801 Marengo, who is Mr. Zabowski's property. and my property, side by side, comparison. And it shows you that what you're looking at is hard facts, real data. It's a comparison between Mr. Zabowski's house and my house at 944. On the left is his house with his next door neighbors. To the east on the right is my house with the footprint of what could possibly be built on the vacant lot after the split. The numbers tell a very interesting story. The ratios prove that my house after the split is almost identical to Mr. Zabowski's. His house is 50 feet wide, but mine is only 42. The distance between his house and his neighbor's house to the east is 29 feet. That's exactly the same distance between the existing 944 house and the future house. Numbers don't lie. Look at the ratios. That is exactly very similar of what he's saying shouldn't happen, and that's the same property that he lives at. It's similar to what 944 Marengo is. Everyone has a right to come up here and say anything they want, the neighbors, or email this board, whatever they want. But it's shocking and disturbing that some residents will go so far to even recommend to this board to discriminate against an applicant or present false information just to get the ZBA to vote a certain way. I served on the Planning Commission for 6 years, 2 of those years as chairman. Even though projects that come before the Planning Commission are a lot more complex than the simple variance request that is before you tonight, the unfounded complaints from neighbors are very similar to what you heard here tonight and what you read into the record through those emails and letters. If you allow this project, my property is going to flood. This project will destroy the environment. What about the kids riding their bikes in the streets? The project will bring our property values down. I lived here for 40 years and I just don't like this. And on and on. The responsibility and legal obligation of the Planning Commission and the ZBA alike is to filter through all this noise and review the applicant's proposal based on the facts and the law and the zoning ordinance, not on irrelevant and or unsubstantiated public comments or fear-mongering. On April 26th, 2023, just a few weeks ago, I had an hour-long meeting with Mr. City Attorney, Mr. Motzny, as I mentioned earlier, to discuss various matters of my variance application. I asked Mr. Motzny the following question: is the ZBA's default position that they accept every comment and every claim that the neighbors make and reject every comment an applicant makes up here? And this was Mr. Motzny's response, and it's very relevant to what unfolded here this evening. He said, quote, and I have notes of this, and these are his exact words, "Well, that's not what they are supposed to do. They're supposed to accept the facts that are equally credible." Now listen to what Mr. Motzny says. He says, we tell the ZBA...
Sir, 1 second.
Yes.
You're introducing a statement from Mr. Motzny that you had a meeting with him?
Yes.
And that's not, in your view, hearsay, or?
It's not hearsay.
Okay.
If it's different, Mr. Motzny can...
Well, Mr. Motzny is not testifying, so.
He's not. If there's anything here that I say that did not occur, he's right here present, and he can comment on it, on this. This is his quote. This is what he said. We tell the ZBA if 20 people show up and they object, you should still grant the variance if the applicant has proven their case. End quote. That's Mr. Motzny. That's what he said in the meeting. We didn't have 20 people here today, but one thing we did have for sure, I have more than proven my case here tonight with clear facts and irrefutable evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any members of the board wish to? All right, thank you, sir. Now we will take this back. Let me speak in front of the microphone. We will take this back to the board now for deliberation. Mr. Desmond?
All right, that was a lot. A couple things. Heard a lot about drainage for a lot of multiple meetings. And drainage issues are for engineering, frankly. I mean, not really us. We're not engineers, and it's not anything that I really take into account, those kind of technical elements in granting or not granting of a variance. The assumption is that relevant city departments would take over after it was said, yeah, go ahead. So drainage issues, irrelevant for me. Value, one of our criteria that we somewhat consider is that it can't affect the value of the neighborhood negatively. New construction, when done correctly, almost never negatively impacts a neighborhood. It almost always positively impacts it because you're going to have a higher price per square foot sale. It almost universally increases property values unless there is some kind of a detriment done to the neighborhood in a structural or logistical sense, which, again, relying on the building department to handle that wouldn't be an issue. Looking at the public record and ArcGIS, a few other things, it does look as though the requested variance is very similar to a substantial number of the existing homes within several of that block and several surrounding blocks. So it's not way out of whack that you'd, ask for this. You have this type of a buildable lot below the, what's currently set up as zoning. I don't see any substantial traffic increase coming from the addition of one small single-family resident house. It's just not going to happen. We're not talking about an apartment building. There's not going to be massive amounts of cars coming in and out of it. It's going to be a couple at max. So it would be negligible. All of that being said, and I am someone who is very for development and investors and investment in communities. It adds to values of residents. It adds to revenues for the city. I love all of it. The only problem that keeps coming up, and I don't think it's actually really been talked about much at all here, is that at the end of the day, we're talking about, it's not, the premise of the variance isn't why we shouldn't split it, all the reasons why there shouldn't be a variance granted. It's the specific hardship for the lot that should. So the problem here, and as much as I want to say, yes, go ahead, split this thing up, do what you're going to do, at the end of the day, they're regular lots. I mean, there's not, I don't see, I mean, from the pictures that went up, these are flat, perfect, regular lots that are just smaller than the zoning. So, I mean, it's not like we can point at some kind of a grade problem or an irregularity in the lot or a deviation in the lot. So, from my perspective, that makes it very difficult to craft effectively any kind of, motion that would meet the criteria as we've been directed to quote them. So these are just my general thoughts after the many hours now of talking about this. And I would ask the rest of the board if I'm off mark on this or if you guys have anything that you could throw in. But that's basically what I'm seeing. Like that, at the end of the day, all of this other stuff stripped aside, what is it about this parcel that gives it the ability to be split beyond? I mean, it's just a basic box. So I guess these are my questions. So
Thank you. All right, Mr. Fox, you want to add to this?
So I guess to respond to the previous comment about the reason, I would want to draw attention to something that the applicant verbally spoke about at the meeting in February, and then I believe is in their written application. Really, the premise for this centers around issues that were created in the platting before the zoning ordinance was originally applied, as well as an improper vacation of an alleyway related to this parcel that was close to this parcel, that the alleyway wasn't properly divided between this parcel and the commercial parcel to the east. If the alleyway had been vacated properly, then there would be room, I believe, for at least the 80 feet. I don't know if the 100 feet would be possible, but if it had been vacated properly, at least the 80 feet would be able to be met by both of these proposed properties. And I guess I just want to draw attention to the fact that the previous item that we looked at this meeting, the hardship was indicated because of plating issues that took place before the zoning ordinance was applied. To me, that is an identical situation to the issue happening here, where this was created by a plating issue that occurred before the zoning ordinance was applied. And if we approved that previous property and that was the hardship, that was the reason, I would argue that that applies to this property at 944 Marengo as well.
I could see that, and that,
So
yeah.
that would be to me, and honestly, for the sake of having a motion that we're actually talking about, I was interested in making a motion to approve this variance request based off of that point regarding the plating would reference item A, the exceptional characteristics of the property. Applicant has also referenced the alley vacation that was improperly done. Characteristics that make compliance with dimensional requirements must be related to the premise for which the variance is sought, which yes, it's a variance for the frontage requirements. Characteristics shall not be of a personal nature. They are not of a personal nature. Make compliance with the detrimental, not caused by a current or previous owner. It was done by plating and zoning that the city did decades ago. Will not be harmful to the essential character of the area. The applicant addressed several of these points, but I see no way that this will violate congestion, public safety, traffic. It will not impair property value. It will not impair public health, safety, comfort, welfare, et cetera. So I would like to make that motion.
I will second.
Thank you.
Motion from Mr. Fox, seconded by Mr. Desmond. Does any member of the board wish to speak? I see Mr. Cankry.
Well, I think the current frontage is 144 feet, right? And the requirement is 100 feet. So any owner of the property is able to use the property. And that point, I think, maybe kind of lost because the way the conversation is going is like, unless the lot is split, this property has no use. It kind of has created that kind of an impression. The lot as it exists can be used. So all the things that happened in the past, that does not create a disadvantage that unless it is split, this lot is unusable. That is not the case. The lot as it stands can be used to have a home. The second thing is that, and again, going back to the case that we heard before this one, there was an observation that 62 feet of lot width is too narrow for Troy of today. And I think there was broad agreement on that. There was probably a unanimous agreement on that. And we are now thinking that a lot that has a width of 67 feet is okay. That doesn't make sense, because we are moving towards lots having width of 100 feet because we don't want to go backwards. And we kind of established that 62 feet was too narrow, and that was the basis. So I don't understand how we can go to 67 feet when our requirement is 100 feet and why we are going backwards. And the third thing is that in our 5 bullets, the last one says that the proposed variance will not be harmful to the essential character of the area, right? So even though our requirement is 100 feet, if I look at the layout, all the lots are 80 feet. And except the ones at the ends, the one on the west side, they are 110, and the ones on the right are 143. That's kind of a very uniform, even though they are not 100. Whatever they are, it has a uniform characteristic which is less than what should be, and now we are taking one lot and breaking it down and taking even further away from that 100-feet requirement. I think it puts that whole neighborhood in a negative light. And I think it harms the character of the area, that potentially it will drive the property values down. That's what one of the neighbors said. So I see so many things in here, and again, I want to remind that the lot, the way it stands, it is usable. There is no compelling reason to break the lot.
Thank you, Mr. Cancri. Mr. McCauley.
I'm going to agree with Mr. Desmond and Mr. Cancri in regards to, we've talked a lot about the vacant property, vacant lot, but we haven't talked much about the 67-foot house, parcel B. And 67 feet, again, I agree, that's way too small. I think this, if I look at our practical difficulties, characteristics which make compliance with dimensional requirements difficult must not have been created by the current or previous owner. As the lot sits right now, there's no dimensional characteristics that hinder it. If we do this, by this homeowner, we've now created that dimensional difficulty. So we are going to be creating one down the road. I see 67-foot lot homeowner coming to us. This house is old. I want to put a new house on here, but I can't fit it on here. It doesn't fit. Now we got to get another variance. Then I think that, and then we're changing the characteristic of the neighborhood. And I'm against changing the characteristic of the neighborhood. Having been a long-time Troy resident, living in an area that has 100 by 300 lots, I understand that those people are bulldozing some of the older homes and putting nice, bigger homes on it. That's fine. They're not changing the characteristics of the size of the lots of the neighborhood. This is. So I am against this split.
Thank you. Mr. Green, did you have a comment?
I do. I am legitimately struggling with this because there are so many factors in play. Setting aside much of what has gone back and forth, it's been fairly vitriolic and it's unfortunate. Setting that aside and focusing specifically on what we have in front of us, which for a non-use variance is we need the 5 points that we've already brought up. There are 2 variances in play in order to make this split work. That, however, is the request. So let's start there. As the property stands today, it can be used. That would require no variance. The homeowner, the property owner, is requesting a split. That split would have been granted had there not been a need for 2 variances to the frontage. Any other homeowner on that stretch, except for those end lots, which is relevant, but would not have been able to do that. But anybody else in a R1E wouldn't have had that same issue because they would have had the 100 feet, not the reduced due to the alley situation on one side. And then on the other side, it's essentially a knock-on effect from that, but would not be due to the homeowner. The 3-foot variance of frontage, give or take 28 inches, as opposed to the larger one on the property to the east. The one backing the business. So there's 2 variances in play, and in both cases, it's a real question as to whether or not the request for the split is creating the problem, in which case, of course, that is the property owner's creation, or whether it is because of the alley that anybody with a similar property in the zoning district wouldn't have had to deal with this issue, and therefore it is not the property owner's responsibility or of their creation, because otherwise it is obviously not personal. It's a non-use split. There's a house there, and one of them can be used, and the other one, I actually do like this better than the one previously brought, because any potential, not even built, not past planning, any potential residents on that potential new lot would be very close to the characteristics of the houses next to it, and the existing house would exist on essentially its current footprint and not have any real change, which wouldn't alter anything dramatically. So broadly speaking, I'm really not sure where I'm coming down, because there are 2 real ways to look at this. the trick is whether it's of the homeowner's creation and whether it's the split at play or whether it's the alley, because our goal is to do it either with minimal change or no change. And 33 feet is substantial. But if it's not the homeowner's creation, then it's not Mr. Apahedian's fault, and I would be inclined to grant the split, the two variances to allow the split.
Mr. Fox?
Yeah, I want to address the broad concept of affecting the characteristics of the neighborhood, because that's something that's been mentioned a couple times. To that point on the characteristics of the neighborhood, when I first looked at this case back in February and looked down at an aerial view, if you showed me that street, Marengo, and did not tell me which property or if any properties are out of sync with the neighborhood, 944 would have been the one that I pointed to and said that one is odd. That is the one that doesn't fit the rest of the neighborhood because of the fact that it is significantly larger than the other properties. I would argue that in its current state, with the current vacant field, 944 kind of just sits there as a, well, what's different about this property? Like you, from walking down the street, just looking straight at it, that's the one that leaves you with a question mark. And I would argue that proposing this split and going through with the split would match the character of the neighborhood better, because it would then bring a property that is non-conforming with the rest of the neighborhoods on the street into conforming with the rest of the houses on the street, to at least a visible discernment. I mean, we are obviously, 77 is different from 80, but from a visual standpoint, it would match better with the characteristics of the neighborhood, just in my opinion.
Mr. Fox, can you,
Sure.
I don't know if you or Mr. Eisenbacher gave the reasons for the motion, but
Oh, I did, yeah.
to speak to what Mr. Kenkre said about that as the property sits right now, I mean, there's a house on it right now, you can use it now. Just for purposes of the pending motion, what were the exceptional characteristics that we are using to base A on?
Yeah, I would say the exceptional characteristics are the alley vacation that was improperly completed some decades ago. I know the exact date is in the application, but I don't have it in my memory. And then the other exceptional characteristic would be the platting that was discussed in the applicant's application as well. And the reason I bring platting forward as a considerable factor is it was one of the key factors in the previous motion that we discussed earlier tonight, was the platting that led to the size of the lot itself. So I would propose that, keeping with consistency, allowing the platting as an exceptional circumstance would make sense.
All right, thank you. Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes, looking at this property, I share many of the views of my colleagues that imagine this house, I mean, yes, this property could be used as it is currently arranged, where the current house is knocked down and a big giant monster footprint house be put in place, and that would greatly change the outlook of the neighborhood and the feel of the neighborhood, way more so than this split would. That's not in our criteria, but that's how I look at it for item E in terms of not be harmful to the essential character. We've got it clearly laid out how the setbacks for the resulting, leaving the house that's currently addressed at 944 Marengo, it is in compliance. It has enough space for the house. There's room in the back to build a garage if a future person wants to. It's a great sized house to provide that variety of housing stock that a lot of people talk about for our city as being important. And there aren't a lot of neighborhoods in this city with that variety of housing stock. Unfortunately, that variety factor comes before us a lot because they tend to be the older neighborhoods where they were built with smaller lots that don't even meet the R1E criteria that you spoke about earlier. It's like we need an R1F for all these exceptions. But that's since 1955 when the city was established and the zoning code was put in place, tradition. So doing a wholesale change to create a whole new zoning district and piecemealing it to all the neighborhoods that were existing at that 1955 to 19 older or up to 1960-ish when they really finalized the layout of all these subdivision spacing would be very difficult. It looks like it's an empty home site. It doesn't look like, when you go down the street, it doesn't look like this house was centered. It doesn't look like there's a flow there. And it just seems to make sense to split it for the least impact to the neighborhood overall, as opposed to what other options there are. I believe it's the least impact in the long term. So I support the resolution.
Yeah, Mr. Green.
I promise to keep it brief. I want to remind everybody, we're not here to get to yes, we're not here to get to no. For homeowners, neighbors, residents, property owners, anybody, we're here to do our best to follow what we have in front of us as presented and per the code, and taking into consideration each other's comments and, as I say, what we've heard. We have heard you when you're talking about safety. And considering traffic and everything else to the neighbors who have come to speak, to the concerned, and to the flooding and the water. While a bit abrasive, the property owner is correct. Those are city issues and should be addressed accordingly. The issue, particularly with a non-use variance, is not to that. It is to the request specifically. And so we will address that. My one question is, and I think I know the answer. Is it homeowner created or property owner created if he is requesting the split because that's causing the need for the variance, or is it not because the reason the split is difficult and would require variances is because of the platting? That will determine my answer, and I would love to hear an answer from the board or from the city attorney or Mr. Evans.
Mr. Fox, do you want to respond to that?
I'm
a separate comment.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, do you have a separate comment, or do you want to respond?
Yeah, I'm responding. I am of the stance that it is due to the platting and the alley vacation, and that would make it not a resident-caused issue.
Thank you. Mr. McCauley?
And I'll disagree with that because I look at the platting as we've had other lots that were smaller that were platted, and they've been absorbed into one tax parcel to build a larger home on, and that was created by the homeowner or the owner of the property. As this one is being separated out, is being created by the owner of the property, and the platting has nothing to do with it. As we've said before, the platting in the past, other on smaller lots, affects only because they're smaller and they don't meet our ordinances now, but there's nothing we can do to change that. Well, there's something we can do to maintain this, and that's not split this and create an issue down the road.
Thank you. All right. Is there any further discussion? I think we may be ready for a vote. So we have a motion pending to grant the variance that was made by Mr. Fox, seconded by Mr. Desmond. And so the vote yes would be to grant the variance request.
Mr. McCauley?
No.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Bossenbrook?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Kenkre?
No.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Variance request has been granted, 5 votes to 2. We thank everyone for joining us tonight. I know this was a long hearing and a lot of emotions, a lot of interested parties, and appreciate everyone speaking and getting a chance to be heard. And so we appreciate everyone coming out tonight. We will move on to item number 6, which is communications. Any communications?
I do not have any.
Mr. Box.
Is this the portion of the agenda where I would give an update related to the Planning Commission? Because we've got a couple things I wanted to just throw out. Yeah, as I'm the liaison between the two boards, Planning Commission, looking at a couple issues. I've been told by city staff that the master plan draft that the Planning Commission released to the city council should be going up in the next couple of city council meetings here, so please be on the lookout for that. City council vote will initiate the 63-day public comment, so if you or any other concerned residents that you're aware of want to make comments on the master plan draft, please feel free to direct them that way. We've had several discussions related to parking requirements in the city. So I believe at this point, city staff's looking into potential options that we can explore related to parking. I know a couple of other things have been brought up, like study sessions, et cetera, but nothing concrete has happened yet on that regard, just discussions at this point. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to item number 7. We're not done yet,
Yep.
even though it's an empty chamber. We now have item number 7. This is the time of year to elect officers for the ZBA.
Right, we do this every May, chair and vice chair, and the terms run for a year, and that's all prescribed in our rules of procedure.
So, I guess this is the opportunity for members of the board to make motions or have discussion about. I obviously am currently the chair. Mr. Eisenbacher is our current vice chair, and I've enjoyed serving as chair and would be happy to continue to do so. But if there's any discussion or nominations, I will feel free to recognize whoever wishes to be recognized. Mr. McCauley.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Bosenbrook as our chair and Mr. Eisenbacher as our vice chair.
Second.
We have a motion. We have Mr. Eisenbacher. Want to comment on your nomination?
After almost 25 years of living and working in Troy, my employer was purchased, our office closed, and now I work in Northville. So it's a bit more tricky for me to get here on time every time. So I would like to give the opportunity to another board member to be vice chair. And Mr. Desmond has been here for quite a while, and I'd like to suggest a nomination to him as a friendly amendment, if there wasn't a second already on that first proposal.
His face says it's hostile.
I think we had a second already, so we're going to have to.
It's already been seconded, sorry. Yeah, that's fine with me if you want. I'm sorry you have to go to Northville every day. It's a long trek there and back.
You don't ride your bike there, do you?
I say good bike ride.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So
I think the maker of the motion and the second can accept that if we both agree as a friendly amendment, I believe. But
either that, or I suppose we could withdraw the motion and have a new motion, but.
I'll withdraw the motion, and I'll make a new motion that we have Mr. Bosenbrook continue as chair, Mr. Desmond assist as assistant chair.
Second.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. McCauley with the motion, Mr. Fox seconded. We can proceed to a vote unless there's any further discussion.
Are you supposed to vote on that?
Yes.
Yes.
So, Mr.
Okay.
Evans?
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Kenkre?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. McCauley?
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Bosenbrook?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Expect that when you
Yes.
came here this evening.
All right. Well, thank you. We have re-elected our officers. We appreciate Mr. Desmond sliding into the vice chair role, and I'm sure he'll be excellent at it.
I look forward to reading the statement of practical difficulty once a month.
You can practice before our next meeting, I guess.
Yes.
Can it get pre-recorded?
All right.
Years of service.
Is there, and I want to thank Mr. Eisenbacher, yes, for all of his diligence and hard work and excellence in reading statement of practical difficulty, stepping in when necessary to be the chair, and all the other ways that he served. So thank you.
No problem.
Appreciate that.
I think that just hit Mr. Desmond.
It's all right.
Anything else? Public comment? I don't see anyone here. Anyone else wish to speak on a public comment? No?
I'd just like to say that I thought everybody handled themselves really well tonight. This has been one of our longest meetings and a lot of emotion, and pleased to be the liaison for this board and this qualified group of members. They're all very
Thank you.
professional and understanding.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Appreciate your support, Mr. Evans and Mr. Motzany. Thank you for your support to the board as well. It's appreciated. All right, with that, we will adjourn. And do we have a meeting in?
We do have one case next month, so we will have a meeting. I won't be here. I won't be here.
All right, you don't have to give us your disclosure location. All right. Thank you.